Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 381. Swish. His eyelids slowly rose. He felt as if his body was floating in the air. The air on his skin and the noisy sounds around him had disappeared. Like an illusion, Yu-Won touched his neck. No sound came out. This place was definitely separated from reality. It's not an illusion. Rustle. Something moved above Yu-Won's head. He looked up and saw a familiar figure wriggling around. Bah! Dan-ah! Everyone around him had disappeared, and only Dan-ah was standing above Yu-Won's head. It seemed like she had come here with him. However, unlike Yu-Won, who couldn't make a sound, Dan-ah seemed to be fine. Bah! Bah! What's she trying to say? Rustle. Just then, a new picture appeared on the black canvas in front of his eyes. The leaves of grass, which didn't have a single drop of moisture, brushed against each other, making a dry sound. A pitch-black forest unfolded before Yu-Won's eyes, and the wind passed through the thick bushes. Only one word came to mind. Black forest. Yu-Won had seen this sight once before. And probably, that was who. It was when he met this guy in front of him. Two eyes appeared in the black forest. A goat, crouched down, was looking at Yu-Won and Dan-ah. Ma, 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 the goat living in the black forest and the baby goats scattered throughout the forest. His mind drifted comfortably to the echo of the goats. But then, thud, bah, Dan-ah tapped Yu-Won on the head. His mind, which had been slowly drifting away, returned. Yu-Won shook his head once and raised his hand to his head. Dan-ah gently climbed onto the back of Yu-Won's hand. I get it. Wake up. A voice came out. Yu-Won walked into the forest. Towards Shub-Niggurath, crouching in that forest. Thud, ma, ma, as he walked into the middle of the forest, the eyes of the baby goats gathered on Yu-Won. The red eyes that appeared around him threatened Yu-Won. They were ready to swarm him like a swarm of bees if he took one wrong step or said one wrong word. And as he reached the end of the black forest, goo! There, a giant goat was crouching. Shub-Niggurath. Gulp. He had thought he would meet him here, but he couldn't help but swallow dryly. He was never weak-willed. However, he couldn't help but feel small in front of this being. Ma, the goat living in the black forest lowered its head and cried. The madness that flowed from its eyes pressed down on Yu-Won's body. Threatening, but Yu-Won knew for sure that the one in front of him now was not the real Shub-Niggurath. Yu-Won's eyes were reflected in the giant goat's eyes. Why did he call him here? After looking into Shub-Niggurath's eyes for a while, Yu-Won discovered something in the center of those large eyes. Isn't that me? Bah! Shub-Niggurath's interest was in Dan-ah, not Yu-Won. As Nyarlathotep said, it was a familiar name. Yu-Won looked around in surprise. The voice came directly into his head like a system, and all he could see around him were young goats. That meant, is that your voice? It meant that this voice belonged to Shub-Niggurath. There was no answer. It was as if his voice didn't even matter. Has changed into such a small vessel. Is this the first time you've returned, or is it the next evolution? Is he talking about Dan-ah? Danpung had only just hatched from its egg. It had only been born a few years ago, so the time it had existed was vastly different from the outer god, Shub-Niggurath, who had existed for an incalculable amount of time. I wanted to ask, what is the meaning of the name that is not heard? How do you know about Danpung, who had only just hatched from its egg? What the heck is this guy? But I didn't ask. I won't be able to hear it. This is Shub-Niggurath's space. The guy only saw what he wanted to see, and I wasn't in his sight. Perhaps my voice won't be transmitted either. Passasu. The trees of the dark forest where Yu-Won was standing began to rot and disappear. The leaves, which had all dried up, crumbled and became fertilizer for the ground, and the goats returned to Shub-Niggurath's bosom. That was the extent of Shub-Niggurath's interest. The guy, who had raised his head for a moment, lowered his head again and crouched down. Anyway, now that I've checked, that's it. The world that had been centered around Shub-Niggurath gradually began to disappear. And around that time, Danpung began to approach Shub-Niggurath. Clack, time rewind, begins. Goo goo, goo 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 goo. The collapsed wall began to return to its original form. Sun Ogong, who had forcibly released the seal of the Gaiwanjin Awugi and was infusing magic power into the Ruyi Bang, turned his head twice. Kronos, Waruk, the Wan Jiamjung, which was nearing completion, looked around. Finding the opponent he wanted was like eating cold rice porridge for him. Far over there, Kronos could be seen approaching this way. Kusususu, Kronos, hair color gradually turned white. It was a very subtle change that you wouldn't notice unless you looked closely, or even if you did. But it was visible to Sun Ogong's eyes. That Kronos was pouring his time into this place. Did you choose, old man? Shouldn't we put out the urgent fire first? He said it as if he had no choice, but he didn't. This was something that could not be undone once chosen. Kronos was now prepared to give up his life for immortality. Just like when he sent Yuan to the past. Jajoye, Jahojoye. The sound was heard in reverse. The cracks that Shub-Niggurath had worked so hard to create were gradually narrowing, and the wall was being repaired. However, in the time that was going backwards, there was one being that flowed in the opposite direction. Ma'a, the black forest goat with 1,000 cubs. Shub-Niggurath was trying to tear the crack open again and enter. Time does not work on this being from outside. The space, including the world they lived in, and even the flow of time, were different beings of the incomprehensible. Shub-Niggurath was one of the outer gods who ranked among the top even among such beings. No matter how much Kronos came to possess the same power as them, it was not enough to rewind time and send Shub-Niggurath back to where it came from. Push it out. I was going to do that even if you didn't tell me. Sun Ogong raised the Ruyi Bang. Get bigger. Geeing. The Gaiwanjin Awugi on his head emitted light. Ruyi. Thud. The Ruyi Bang pushed Shub-Niggurath's body. That wasn't all. Wang, Wang, Wu Wang. Hundreds of magic circles were engraved on the surface of the giant Ruyi Bang. It's been a while since I've supported someone. Odin raised both hands and bestowed magic on Sun Ogong's Ruyi Bang. Kaka, Kakaka, power was added to the Ruyi Bang that Sun Ogong extended. Odin judged that it would be better to help Sun Ogong rather than swing his own broken fist. Kronos, time rewind, Sun Ogong's Ruyi Bang, and even Odin's magic. As the three top high rankers in the tower poured out their strength, Shub-Niggurath's body began to be pushed out little by little. Jijik, as they watched the body that had not moved until now being pushed out. Now is the time. Protect everyone. This is our chance. Push that monster out. Other rankers who had been waiting for an opportunity from far away began to move as well. Everyone had the same thought. To push Shub-Niggurath back beyond the wall. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Roar. The wall was restored smoothly, and Shub-Niggurath began to be slowly pushed outside. From the looks of it, everything seemed like it was going to end. However, crackle, Kronos' beard became brittle and twisted, turning into dust that scattered into the air. Kronos' hair and beard, which had gradually turned white, had completely changed into the hair of a frail old man. The wrinkles on his face also increased. Sun Wukong glanced at Kronos' face. That geezer, Kronos' power was not infinite. There was definitely a limit to the time he could use. Furthermore, unlike the magic used by ordinary players, this power did not replenish itself over time. Once all of his power was used up, he would disappear from this world once again. This time, the result might be worse than being thrown out of the tower. That geezer might die of old age before that. Continuously pouring out finite power was not simply a matter of using up time, but also of consuming physical and mental strength. If this continued, there were two possibilities. Kronos would collapse from exhaustion. Or, he would die of old age after using up all the time given to him. Neither of these were pleasant outcomes. Me. Screech. Shub-Niggurath flapped its purple fur and tore apart the wall that was regenerating around it once again. As Kronos recreated the wall, the speed at which Shub-Niggurath tore the wall apart and created cracks also increased. It was as if it was mocking everyone in the tower. It let out a cry like that. There's no other way. Swish. Sun Wukong grabbed the headband wrapped around his head. This is a spell that seals your power. In the heavenly realm he had arrived in. Sun Wukong was able to hear the same words he had heard before his regression this time as well. However, it is a spell that must not be released. The seal of the headband that was worn on his head had never been released before. It was natural, since he did not know how to release it before. However, this time was different. I know how to release it. A brief moment of hesitation. If I release this, Sun Wukong shook his head. That was as far as he thought. Rather than watching Shub-Niggurath enter the tower like this, it would be better to release the seal. If Shub-Niggurath entered the tower, an even greater disaster would likely unfold. As Sun Wukong was about to release the seal of the headband. Stop, swish, a hand stretched out from behind and grabbed Sun Wukong's wrist. Sun Wukong turned his head. He knew from the voice, but as expected, Yuan, who had been absent-minded for a while, was holding his hand. There's no other way. Sun Wukong was resolute. In his mind, there was no other way to overcome this situation. In fact, Odin, who was fighting alongside him, did not have any good ideas either. However, Yuan still shook his head. There is another way. Is there another way? Yes. Sun Wukong made a puzzled expression. His grip on the headband loosened at Yuan's unwavering answer. Was there really another way? As Sun Wukong's face asked what that was, Yuan's gaze moved in a different direction. From now on, above Shub-Niggurath's head, creak. A black mouth revealed its teeth towards the nape of Shub-Niggurath's neck. That guy will take care of it. Chapter 382. Predator, bares its teeth at Shub-Niggurath. Predator bared its teeth at Shub-Niggurath. Yuan watched the scene. If what he experienced wasn't just a dream, then this was definitely happening. Quack. Those teeth would pierce through Shub-Niggurath's tough body. Quack, quadook. Predator's teeth bit into the nape of Shub-Niggurath's neck. No blood flowed out. Instead, the goats making up Shub-Niggurath's body cried out. Me. Were they suffering in place of their mother? The rankers who had been pouring out skills stopped for a moment as they heard the goats' cries. What's going on all of a sudden? Og. Their heads throbbed, and their vision blurred. Regardless. Sun Ogong and Odin, who were closest to Shub-Niggurath, stared blankly at the sight unfolding before them, their faces devoid of expression. What the? Is it working? Quadook. Predator's teeth dug deep into Shub-Niggurath's nape. And then, quack, Shub-Niggurath's flesh was chewed up in Predator's mouth. And at that moment, Predator bit Shub-Niggurath's nape. Part of Shub-Niggurath has been consumed. The message Yuan had been waiting for appeared in his head. I had a feeling it would, but an unbelievable message. Quadook. Part of Shub-Niggurath's body disappeared. No matter how much it was cut or crushed, Shub-Niggurath's body, which had no fixed form to begin with, would always regenerate. But now, its body wasn't regenerating. To think it would even eat that thing. One of the two insurances Yuan had been counting on, besides Sun Ogong. It was Dan Ah's existence. Bah! Yuan looked at Dan Ah, who was on his shoulder, her arms around his neck, and making exaggerated gestures toward Shub-Niggurath. Dan Ah and Predator, neither of them is stronger than Shub-Niggurath. Of course, Predator's power was the natural enemy of the outer gods. He knew that well. However, no matter what, the difference in power between the Predator that Yuan knew and Shub-Niggurath wasn't something that could be explained simply as being natural enemies. Nevertheless, the Predator's teeth were able to bite into Shub-Niggurath's nape and consume part of his body. There was only one possible reason. Is it because it's a higher existence than Shub-Niggurath? The level of Dan Ah has risen. The level of Dan Ah has risen. The level of Dan Ah. The divine power of Dan Ah has increased by 12. Growth rate has increased by 0.01%. Magic power has increased by 5. The increase in level, divine power, and magic power was significant. Her divine power had increased by 12 stages. And her magic power had increased by a total of 5 stages. Normally, the world would feel different even if her stats increased by 1 stage. Was it because of that? Thanks to the 5 stats that had suddenly increased, Yuan felt like he had become a completely different person. Growth rate has reached 100%. The growth of Dan Ah will begin. Finally, those 3 words lingered in Yuan's mouth on their own. Ever since he had first entered the tower after passing the tutorial. How long had he been waiting for this moment? Maybe with this growth, he would be able to learn a little more about Dan Ah. Of course. First, I have to deal with that guy. Ma! Shub-Niggurath let out a pained scream. With its nape half bitten, Shub-Niggurath thrashed around in pain. Thud! Yuan's body leapt upwards. At the same time, Nier, the spear that had been blocked by the devil's hand, returned to Yuan's hand. Swish! Magic power flowed out of Nier, which was held in Yuan's hand. It still wasn't fully activated. Timing is more important than power. Whoosh! The tip of the spear trembled. Although it definitely wasn't activated, a different kind of power than Yuan had ever used before was imbued in the spear. Divine power has been imbued. The power of a giant has been imbued in your right arm. Boom, boom, his arm, swollen from the transformation into a giant. Yuan assumed a javelin-throwing posture in the air and threw the spear with all his might, twisting his waist. Whoosh! The spear was embedded in Shub-Niggurath's body. It was the decisive blow for Shub-Niggurath, who was slowly being pushed back by the Rui Jingu Bang, and whose nape had been ripped out by the predator. Ma! It seemed very resentful. Shub-Niggurath flew over the wall and to the other side, screaming. Shub-Niggurath's body quickly moved away. At the same time, Time moved its second hand quickly again. Click, click, buzz, buzz. The space where Shub-Niggurath had entered was quickly restored. Yuan turned his head. Kronos was seen restoring the wall to its original state. The wrinkles on his face were already countless, and his white hair was worse than Yuan last knew. Buzz, buzz. The wall returned to its original state. The wall was neat without a single scratch. As Shub-Niggurath was pushed back outside in the wall, the boundary between the tower and the outside returned to its original state. There was a brief silence in the stadium. And then, finally, am I safe? Did we win? Ha, ha, the relaxed rankers began to cheer. We won. Nothing was as contagious as the sound of cheering. In an instant, the battlefield was filled with cheers of joy, delight, and relief. Instead of the ominous cries of goats and sheep, screams of joy pierced the ears. Was that why? Sun Wukong, who had unusually good hearing, poked his ears with his fingers as if it was noisy. Wow, what's the fuss about? He said that, but he was relieved as well. Sun Wukong turned his head and looked at the wall that had collapsed until just a moment ago. Maybe it was because he arrived the latest, but it still didn't feel real. Shub-Niggurath, just what was the guy he had been fighting until just now? The battlefield was quickly cleaned up. Each guild assessed the damage and prepared the funeral for the dead. Half of the players caught up in Shub-Niggurath's scream died on the spot or became useless person. Many guilds were desperate to identify the monster. And one more thing, Satan ran away during his fight with Zeus. It was right after Shub-Niggurath was pushed out and the wall was restored. One of his wings is gone. He probably won't be able to fly like before. With those words, Zeus disappeared somewhere. Fortunately, Kronos did not become a target of the guild. No one recognized him because he had been disguised as Poseidon from the beginning. In the city that had been submerged in the sea and collapsed. In the city where the water had just receded, Yuan and Sun Ogong found a relatively intact house and settled down. Suddenly, Sun Ogong, who had gone out somewhere, returned with his hands full of food. Master, he hasn't woken up yet. Thud, Sun Ogong placed the box he was holding on the table. The large box was filled with fruit, processed sausages, beef jerky, and bread. Kronos was sleeping in the inner room. His twisted and emaciated body was so weak that it seemed like it would break if he tried to lift it. Is he going to wake up? Am I a doctor? I don't know. How long are we going to wait? I don't know that either. The door was closed. Kronos was lying inside. Still, shouldn't we be together when we go on our last journey? Kronos sacrificed himself for them. Although it was because of what happened, in any case, this would be the second time his sacrifice had been made. It had already been 2 days since he lost consciousness. Yuan planned to wait a little longer for Kronos to wake up. Where did you get all this food? Crunch. Yuan took an unknown fruit from the box Sun Ogong had brought. Where in the ruined city did he get this? If this was an ability, then it was an ability. Someone gave it to me. Who? The kid outside. He wouldn't have just given it to you. Did you extort it from him? I asked for it, so he gave it to me. He had extorted it from him. How many people in this tower could refuse Sun Ogong when he asked for something? Not to mention ordinary players, even high rankers would probably have to take off their pants. Sun Ogong had been famous for his violence even before he turned the heavens upside down. Crunch. Sun Ogong bit into another fruit, just like Yuan. As something entered his mouth, Sun Ogong seemed to relax a little, and after a long time, he finally sat down on a chair. Still, it's a shame. I thought I'd see Master again. Thanks to him, we were able to stop Shub-Niggurath. That guy, why did he suddenly come out? Most of the time Kronos used was to block Shub-Niggurath. The power of Shub-Niggurath was so strong that even Son Goku, Odin, and Kronos had to join forces to barely block it. No, well, anyway, it's fortunate that it's blocked. It wouldn't have ended this way if that guy had come inside. Rather, it was fortunate that it was over. Shub-Niggurath was a disaster that could not be stopped by the tower at the moment. And it was the same in the future. The day when the 1,000 chicks he led were released into this tower, and the Black Forest came to the tower. Yuan and his colleagues gave up on winning the fight against the outer. This will make the tower noisy for a while, since we've learned about the existence outside. Yes, it will be noisy, especially Odin. He must be thinking a lot right now. He might open that door and come here right now. That would be quite fun. Son Goku chuckled. For him, who loves noisy things and fights, this vague wait was an unbearable boredom. In that case, it would be better for Son Goku if Odin came here and made a fuss. Thud. As if the thought was funny, Son Goku picked up one of the foods he had spilled on the table while laughing. A small purple egg. It was a fairly appetizing egg, a little bigger than a fist. Son Goku brought it to his mouth to eat it in one bite. But, that's not edible. At Yuan's words, Son Goku's hand, which was bringing the large egg to his mouth, stopped. It's not edible. Then what is this? Son Goku looked at the egg in his hand, and Yuan's surprised expression came into his eyes. What? Why are you doing that? Behind you. Knock, knock. Yuan pointed at the back of Son Goku with his finger. A gesture to check behind you. What is there that you're doing this? Son Goku turned his head and looked behind him. And that moment. Son Goku's expression also changed, just like Yuan's. There, Z's. A huge mouth was preparing to devour Son Goku, aiming at the countless teeth. In order to protect the egg in Son Goku's hand. Chapter 383. Sun Ogong looked at the teeth behind him with a startled face. It was ready to pierce Sun Ogong's neck at any moment. If Sun Ogong hadn't noticed it and had taken the egg into his mouth as it was, it would have probably chewed him up. Get this out of my way. Let go of the egg in your hand first. Oh, right. Sun Ogong glanced at the egg near his mouth. He should have gotten rid of it right away. Whether it was because he was playful, Sun Ogong curled his lips. Quote. Yuan looked at Sun Ogong's expression with curiosity. Swish. Sun Ogong slightly detached the egg from his mouth and then put it back in its original place. Squirm, squirm. The predator's teeth behind Sun Ogong's back twitched slightly. It was ready to bite if Sun Ogong threatened the egg at any moment, but it couldn't do anything as Sun Ogong didn't let go of the egg. Swish, pop. Sun Ogong repeated the action of bringing the egg near his mouth and then moving it away. The predator couldn't do anything about it. Yuan eventually laughed at the constant prank. Stop it now. Isn't it fun? Sun Ogong didn't stop even though he was told to stop. Well, if Sun Ogong was a little smarter and listened to others, his ranking would have probably gone up at least 1 or 2 steps. Don't do that too much. That guy doesn't seem to know what to do either. And it could be really dangerous. If I get hurt, I'll just lie down next to that old man for a while. Didn't you see how it dealt with Shub-Niggurath? Shub-Niggurath. The image of the predator biting Shub-Niggurath's nape flashed through Sun Ogong's mind. He turned his head to look at it, and it was still opening its mouth behind Sun Ogong. It looked somewhat ridiculous as if it was watching something, but the predator was definitely dangerous. Swish. In the end, Sun Ogong carefully placed the egg back on the table. The predator watched Sun Ogong's actions for a moment and then quietly disappeared. A brief incident. Still, it let him know one thing. It's not that threatening unless you touch the egg. When Sun Ogong touched the egg in the moment he tried to eat the egg by mistake. The predator didn't attack Sun Ogong until the last moment and watched Yuan. There was only one reason. It was because Sun Ogong was Yuan's colleague. It's friendly for now, I guess. When he first got the egg, Yuan had swung his sword at the egg as if he was threatening it. It was because he had to stop hatching the creature if it ever attacked him. Fortunately, though, the egg was friendly to Yuan. So was Dan-ah, and so was the new, bigger egg. For now. Yuan looked down at the egg. Suddenly, he remembered the day he stopped Shub-Niggurath. The Black Forest. Dan-ah raised her head in it and approached Shub-Niggurath. Bang, bang. Her steps were light, just like always. However, Yuan couldn't follow her. Www. He could feel an enormous, indescribable power from the round back of Dan-ah, who was the same as always. Crack. That was when the predator that covered Shub-Niggurath's body appeared. The predator was something Yuan had seen many times. Its existence wasn't that surprising to Yuan. However. What the? Whoosh. Thud, thud thud. The size of the predator that devoured Shub-Niggurath was completely different from anything Yuan had ever known. Shub-Niggurath, no, a giant mouth that was devouring the entire Black Forest. Despite being able to resist, Shub-Niggurath didn't do anything as if everything happening now was natural. Quad, quad, the predator that devoured the Black Forest. And Dan Ah, who was handling the predator in front of his eyes, watched as Shub-Niggurath spoke. An amorphous being that endlessly repeats destruction and creation. Now it will find its form and appear before us. Please, spare us your fangs. The black goat of the woods. The mother of all things closed her eyes, which were glistening purple. In the black forest that had been dragged by Shub-Niggurath. Quack, Yu-Won came to know about Dan Ah's true form. An amorphous being that found its form. All the outer gods had pseudonyms that replaced their real names. To be exact, they were fake names created by the players of the tower. Unable to handle the names of the outer gods, they borrowed things like their characteristics and symbols and created names. But what Shub-Niggurath said was like an explanation of an outer god. It seems like you picked up something incredible. Yu-Won shook his head at Sun Ogong's words while looking at the egg. Rather than picking it up, it's more like I raised it. Can you be its father? I raised it with a similar feeling. It doesn't suit you at all. A groan was heard during their conversation. Yu-Won and Sun Ogong turned their heads at the same time. A closed door. Yu-Won got up from his seat and opened the door. Creak. As the door opened, Kronos was seen slowly opening his eyes on a bed against the wall. His dazed eyes gradually came into focus, and Kronos's consciousness slowly returned. Mr. Hey, old man, are you awake? The terms of address were different. However, Kronos reacted to both of their calls. Where is this? What year is it? Why are you suddenly asking what year it is? Old man, are you senile? 20 years of tower time. Sun Ogong looked back at him at Yu-Won's answer. An answer without any doubt. And Kronos repeated the same words in his mouth, mumbling. 2020 years. He must have mumbled the same words 10 times. Yu-Won opened his mouth. Tell me if you have something to say. Whatever it is. It would be better than just listening to the year over and over, no matter what he said. Instead of getting comfortable, if he was going to keep mumbling the same words, it would be better to let him say what was on his mind. Kronos's mouth paused for a moment. Soon, different words came out of his mouth. I time traveled. Time travel. It probably wasn't just a regression using a clockwork. Yu-Won saw the faces of several people with the same face through his eyes. I met many, me's, who lived different lives in different worlds. He wasn't the Kronos from a few days ago. Through the clockwork, he had become one, a collective of countless Kronoses. Through several futures, pasts, and presents, Kronos had experienced countless selves and found one commonality. Swoosh, eyelids slowly closing and opening as if he was sleepy. His heavy eyes looked at Yu-Won and Sun Ogong, and a cracked voice came out with difficulty. You were in my future. Yu-Won and Sun Ogong. Kronos had seen and experienced the two of them, along with many other companions, through various timelines. Everyone except me was like that. They all fought the outer. Why only here? Yu-Won answered Sun Ogong's question. It must be because of us. Us, the two who returned to the past using the clockwork. Kronos being banished outside the tower and forgotten by everyone was a side effect and the price for breaking the laws of the tower. No, to be exact, it must be because of me. You came at the cost of Mimir's eye. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. I'm just saying that I didn't know myself. The second sacrifice. Kronos' barely opened eyes turned to the color of dirt. He had already lived far past his lifespan. He was merely enduring with the body and mental strength of a high ranker who had trained for a long time. Thump. Yu-Won gritted his teeth without expression. He clenched his fist hard enough for his fingernails to dig into his palm. Kronos opened his mouth at Yu-Won's reaction. This was my choice, and it's just the result that came from it. So don't feel sorry. I knew it, actually. Kronos' time was limited. He also knew that this would happen if he used up all of his time. He wished for this result to not happen, but he still thought that it was inevitable. Still, the worst thing was that bastard coming over. What would have happened if Shub-Niggurath had come over? Yu-Won, as well as Sun Wukong, Odin, Kronos, and tens, hundreds of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of players would have died. That's what kind of being Shub-Niggurath was. A god with an incomprehensible power, greater than any calamity humans could think of. Yu-Won only thought about how to stop it somehow. There was no other way. If Shub-Niggurath crossed the wall, then it would be a time that even Kronos' power couldn't reverse. That's why I pushed it onto you, uncle. I knew this would happen. You've always been like that. Telling me to save my time. Like it was more precious than gold. Yu-Won's pupils shook. Yu-Won had definitely said those words before. Many times, too. But it wasn't in this timeline, at least. A very distant future. So that meant it was after the fight with the outer gods began. Save your time, uncle. Or you'll really start hearing yourself called an old man. How many times have I heard that? Not that many. I can remember it being over 10 times. Should I go over them? How many times have you said it? It hasn't even been a minute since I told you to save your damn time. Words he had said like nagging every time. But they were lacking. Kronos was mentioning those words now. I know you'll feel sorry. It wasn't just to make things easier for you. Click. The closed door opened again. Sun Wukong, who couldn't take it anymore, went outside. When a scream close to a roar was heard, Kronos smiled faintly. It seems like that guy is pretty fired up too. Crackle. Kronos, skin dried up and twisted. With an appearance close to a mummy and eyes that had lost all focus, Kronos continued speaking. Do you remember the day you first used the clockwork? A strained voice came out of his extremely dry mouth. Even though his voice was starting to break a little, Kronos' speech didn't slow down one bit. Instead, Yu-won didn't answer. Even that short amount of time he took to answer was more precious than 1,000 gold to him now. I was planning on fighting them by throwing my life away that day. But for whatever reason, I didn't end up dying. So nothing changed. He tried to die but didn't. If he had come back to life, he should have wanted to live again, but Kronos chose to die again. That was his choice. This is just an extension of that. Chapter 384. Kronos' body turned into dust and disappeared. Gathering the dust, Yuan and Sun Ogong made a small tomb on the first floor. It wasn't a particularly grand tomb. After bowing towards the tomb, Yuan turned around. I'll deliver the message to Zeus. Since I made a tomb here, tell him to move it later. Doesn't he forget things like inspiration? He remembers. Looks like he found it. Really, he's quite something, not even a wizard or sorcerer. If we leave a message, he'll probably come on his own. Although their relationship wasn't close, Kronos and Zeus were somewhat on good terms. It was only natural to announce Kronos' death. Cassius. Yuan's suit disappeared, and he returned to his original attire, including the clothes of a divine spirit. Seeing Yuan in that state, Sun Ogong remarked in amazement, "You wear that outfit every time someone dies." The black suit was not only for Kronos but had been worn by comrades who had died long ago. It was a minimal sign of respect for them. They couldn't offer a proper meal, but at least they couldn't stand before them in fancy clothes. It's the outfit I wore in my world. I see. I haven't seen anyone else wear it but you. An image of himself in a suit popped into Sun Ogong's mind. It was quite a nice design. Get me one too, that one. Do I have to go that far? Why not? It's nice. We all wear the same outfit when we send someone off. That made sense. In a situation where someone had to be sent off now, it would be better to show some formality. Formality didn't need to be excessive, but without it, it would be rude. However, I just don't want to be ready to send anyone off. After changing clothes like that, Yuan boarded the ship with Sun Ogong. It was a ship sent from Asgard. Now what? Sun Ogong asked as he watched Yuan board the ship. Yuan, climbing aboard, replied while lifting the anchor. We have to go up. After all, the answer is up there. It's a common story. He thought he had gained quite a bit just by driving out the foolish incarnation of chaos. But thanks to that, he regained his senses. I need to hurry a little more. Shub-Niggurath appeared. They started to move faster than I thought. Does that mean they are getting impatient? I drove them out for now, but I will have to face Shub-Niggurath someday. I probably won't be able to run away like this then. Can you go alone? Yu-won replied as if he was surprised at Sun Ogong's question. Am I a kid? It seems like there's someone who's after you. It's fine. What about you? Do you have somewhere to go? Do you think I'm the only one who came back with the clockwork? Thinking about it, that was true. Sun Ogong may be an idiot, but he was the great sage, heaven's equal. An arrogant and great being with the title of the great saint who rules the heavens. He came here after turning back time. Of course, he must have made some preparations. I think I'll go to India again. India, it's a place I only reached in the trial, but India, a mysterious place said to contain Buddhist scriptures. Sun Ogong gained new powers and the Kinko staff there. But maybe it actually exists. No, I'm sure it does. Sun Ogong thought that the place might actually exist somewhere in the tower, not just in the trial. It wasn't just a guess. He never had a hunch that turned out to be wrong. And Yu-won thought the same. If you feel that way, then it must be true. It wasn't just a feeling that had been there for a day or two but for quite a while. After watching him for a long time, Yu-won realized that Sun Ogong's intuition was something beyond a mere feeling. It was probably closer to a kind of foresight that came from raising the proficiency of the Wanmong to the extreme. Rumble. A cloud appeared under Sun Ogong's feet. Sun Ogong, who got on the somersault cloud, looked down at Yu-won. Then see you later, my friend. Sun Ogong waved his hand lightly. It hadn't been long since they met again. But they had to part ways for now since they were going in different directions. Thwack. Sun Ogong quickly disappeared into the distance. With the somersault cloud, it might not be impossible for him to search the entire tower for India. I wonder how long it will take him. Yu-won had no doubt. If it were Sun Ogong, he would definitely reach the real heaven and get his hands on the Buddhist scriptures. Then I will too. Yu-won raised his head. On the moving Asgard ship, he could see the heavens that were gradually getting closer. I should go up. The tower's walls had been destroyed. They were soon repaired, but Shub-Niggurath's presence from outside was enough to threaten the tower's rankers. Odin is having a hard time, isn't he? Is that all? I heard Zeus and Emperor of the Heavenly Realm were there too. Veda's rankers were there too, and just the number of rankers there must have been in the thousands. It'll probably go down in history, won't it? What kind of monster is it that such forces could barely stop it? Rumors about the monster outside the tower spread rapidly. Several reporters sent out articles speculating about Shub-Niggurath's true identity through player kits. Some rankers even took pictures. But there was one thing in common in those pictures. What the heck is this? What happened to these pictures? They're all broken. The pictures looked like they had captured an opaque figure that was hard to make out. Not a single ranker had managed to take a proper picture of Shub-Niggurath. They all looked badly shaken or out of focus. There were about 10 such pictures. It was too low of a probability to dismiss it as mere coincidence. And it wasn't just Shub-Niggurath, but the other outer gods as well. The wall was protecting us. But it could collapse someday. If that happens, it'll be a disaster. No one knew the name Shub-Niggurath. No one but Yu-won or Sun Ogong could have heard his name, and there was no way to find out his name. That was why the tower's rankers defined Shub-Niggurath and the other outer gods as outer. It was the first time a word had been created to define beings from outside the tower. And as information about the outer gradually spread, I heard Asgard requested an alliance with the major guilds. From Asgard, Odin seems to be in shock. He said he's going to close down until the day of the alliance. Well, a monster that even Odin can't handle one-on-one has appeared. Which major guilds? All of them. All of them. Invitations were sent to several large guilds, including Olympus, Veda, Ma Wong, Round Table, and Muram. Those numerous guilds planned to gather together. Come to think of it, a lot of Veda's rankers died this time, didn't they? Agni and Kubera, then the 3 gods of Veda too. Are they going to move this time? Didn't most of them go into seclusion except for Shiva? No matter what, it's Odin's invitation. Veda was a giant guild that rivaled Asgard and Olympus on the tower. And leading that Veda were the 3 gods of Veda. The attention of the world was focused on whether the 3 gods of Veda would move at this invitation from Asgard. And at that moment, on the 98th floor, in the Veda star, which was located in the middle of the universe, a bright flame flickered. Warwick, Waroruk, I've known of your presence here for a long time. Agni walked towards a slender man with white hair, his orange hair tied back. The star was too small to be called a planet. At the edge of the star, which was only the size of a small island, the man had a small thread wrapped around his finger. Odin has sent an invitation. ... How long do you intend to be fixated on such a thread? ... The man still did not answer Agni's question. Like a doll with its soul gone, he remained motionless. And at the same time, it was the same for Kubera. It's been a long time, Brahmanim. The little boy that Kubera found. Standing in the middle of a vast forest, the boy turned his head and smiled brightly when he spotted Kubera. The high rankers of Veda, who had experienced Shub-Niggurath, moved to get the 3 gods to move. And at that moment, I found out the guy's name. Mimir, who had been asleep again for a while, said to Odin, who was carrying a small mountain of rocks on his bare back and sweating profusely. As I thought, and behind that mountain of rocks, Goo, a huge tree that stretched endlessly high into the sky shook its branches. Looks like I'll have to move Yggdrasil. Thud. The ship arrived. Yu-won returned the ship he had borrowed from Asgard and immediately called for the administrator. However, strangely, there was no response. The administrator is currently busy. Instead, one of the administrator's errand boys came to find Yu-won. Instead, the only one who came to the amusement park was one of the manager's errand boys. The manager disappeared, leaving the world empty, when Shub-Niggurath appeared in Asgard. Yu-Won tried to go up through the manager's test, but it seemed difficult because the manager was busy. At this time, Satan appears in Yu-Won's ship and aims for Yu-Won. Yu-Won decides to deal with Satan and prepares lightning and near. A great change is taking place everywhere in the tower. The guy just threw those words and disappeared. He seemed to be quite busy. Is it because the wall collapsed? Or is it because the manager of the first floor is absent? It's probably both. The manager's absence was a big deal to them. There is nothing more urgent for a manager than to empty a world. And on top of that, Shub-Niggurath showed up. I guess there's no quick way to go. I was thinking of going up by passing the manager's test, even if I had to spend a few points. It seemed that it would be difficult because the manager was busy. Just then, Yu-Won turned around and was about to head to the test site. Snap, there was a sound from the bow of the ship Yu-Won was riding. Light footsteps somewhere. Yu-Won's head turned towards the bow. A figure that looked darkly like a shadow. A gruesome chill ran through his body. He was a dwarf man with a deformed body with only one wing and one arm. The guy the first met not too long ago. Is it Satan? I knew he was after me. Even Son Goku was worried about Yu-Won because of such a Satan. But Yu-Won had no intention of borrowing Son Goku's hand for such a reason. Come on down. At Yu-Won's gesture, the corners of Satan's lips went up. It seemed that he had been waiting for Yu-Won here for quite some time. Flap, Satan spread his wings from the beginning. It is now only one side left due to the fight with Zeus, but the wings are like the source of Satan's power. Taking it out meant that he would give it his all from the beginning. It's better this way. It's shit that I have to clean up anyway. Above all, Satan, that guy is a delinquent who doesn't know when or where he's going to cause an accident. It would be better to catch him here than to take more time and create another variable. Besides, I got a lot more this time. Yu-Won had gained much more stats than usual in this fight. Crackle, lightning erupts from the palm of his hand. The lightning created like that in Nier, which was held in the other hand. Maybe it'll be different from that time. At the same time, in Satan's eyes, the figure of Zeus overlapped Yu-Won, who was holding lightning in his hand. The tower was going through a time of great change everywhere like that. Chapter 385. After numerous rankers joined forces to expel Shub-Niggurath from the first floor. The organization that was the busiest was the Ranking Management Bureau. There were several changes to the rankings since that day. Odin's ranking did not change. Zeus and Sun Wukong's rankings rose significantly. So much so that the world mentioned their names the most. Yu-Won's ranking also rose. It was different from the top-ranking high rankers like Zeus and Sun Wukong, but when looking at the amount of increase in ranking, Yu-Won's was clearly superior. Yu-Won's ranking, which was in the 50s, rose to 38th. On the other hand, there was also a high ranker whose ranking fell after the battle. It was Satan. Swish, creak, creak. Yu-Won's hand reached out and grabbed Satan's arm. The arm imbued with gigantification instantly broke Satan's arm in the opposite direction. Snap, it sounded like a thick tree breaking. Satan twisted his body and screamed from the pain in his arm. Ka, I heard your ranking dropped to 16th. Bang. Satan's foot kicked Yu-Won in the chest. Whoosh. Yu-Won's body was pushed far away from Satan. It was a bit shocking, but it was okay. Blessing of the Sea is imbuing your body. There were many ways to protect his body in hand-to-hand combat. Because you lost an arm and a wing. Arm and wing. Satan had lost a lot in the last battle. Losing his wings in particular was a big deal. The two wings were like the source of Satan's power. It wasn't for nothing that his ranking had dropped so rapidly. Of course, even so, a high ranker in the single digits couldn't just fall this powerlessly. Slash. A shallow and long wound appeared on Yu-Won's chest. Blood spurted up. It happened almost simultaneously with the arm being broken. He's fast. Even if he only had one wing, Satan was still Satan. His physical abilities, although his size was the complete opposite, were comparable to Hercules. No, the defense of his body was probably even greater. Rumble, lightning struck from the sky. Satan's body shook for a moment. Yu-Won, who had created distance during that time, shook his head and looked at Satan, who had regained his senses. He was barely flinching after being struck by lightning. It's not going to end this way. If he dragged it out into a prolonged battle, it would end eventually. If he continued to rain down lightning and erode his body with dark attribute mana, an opening would appear. But if he himself was defeated before that happened, Yu-Won didn't want to fight in an uncertain way. Then, I thought about it. Swish. From his inventory, Yuan pulled out a mirror shield. Yada's mirror. A mirror shield made of numerous surfaces. One of the 3 divine treasures, an item that the 3-eyed being coveted. And in his other hand, a way to pierce that hard body of yours. ZZZT, Pazuzuzu. The item that blew off Satan's hand. Nier was starting to activate. As expected, this is the most certain. Zing. At the same time, light radiated from Yada's mirror. Yada's space is being created. Crack, clack, clack. Clack, clack. Numerous mirrors appeared around Yuan and Satan. A wall and ceiling made of mirrors. The image of Yuan holding Nier was reflected on the numerous surfaces. Thousands, tens of thousands of spears. Satan's eyes widened when he saw it. No, smash. Punching a nearby mirror and breaking it, Satan rushed towards Yuan. It was an item powerful enough to blow off Satan's arm. The moment it activated, it was obvious that the flow of battle would change. But, clang, smash, clang. It didn't matter how many mirrors he broke. Satan couldn't find Wu Wun. Instead, he could see more and more Wu Wuns thanks to the broken fragments. H couldn't break the increasing number of mirrors just by punching them. In the end, Satan's witchhead methods. Choo 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 choo. The darkness that sprouted from Satan's body began to devour the mirrors. The darkness devoured the mirrors and covered the form of Wu Wun reflected in it. In order for mirrors to exert their effect, fear had to be light. Just like that, the mirrors were eaten by the darkness and disappeared one by one. However, Paji Gigi. By that time, Nurse startup was already complete. Pot. Satan dished towards Wu Wun. Here had Tohori and block Wu Wun's movements before the spear fight started. However, if you have something like this, didn't you come a little earlier? Swaa. A strong wind blew from the mirror that had reflected Wu Wun's form until just a moment before. Sook. Red light seeped through the wind. It's Satan. KWAU. Over there, Susanoo was preparing a hiskill, holding the Kusanagi no Tsurugi in his hand. He's an opponent that tastes like Bell. KWAUT. Storm Fortress. Astrongal embraced Satan's body, carrying hundreds of thousands of blades. Satan's body, which had been moving forward, was pushed back by the strong wind. The storms of heavy Hadi up and for Medigiant Castle, creating several scratches on Satan's solid body. Pit, Pipit, PIIT. Each one was a small wound that could be called fresh. However, just as droplets of water accumulate and pierce through a rock, the wounds eventually succeeded in cutting Satan's body. Sua, Kiyu. Satan shrugged and groaned at the wound on his waist. It is the result of cutting the same place dozens, hundreds of times. However, the wound was only as deep as a fingernail. Moreover, it was possible because Hiborakusanagi's sharpness. Susanoo, W. How's the skill, eventually stuck out his tongue. He's a really tough guy. Storm Fortress was the most destructive skill among Susanoo's techniques. Storm Fortress consumed that much magical power, and Susanoo unleashed the skill at the maximum of his power without thinking about his magical power. Itis because Wu Wun, who had become the reservoir of magical power, had that much magical power. For a short while Susanoo was buying more time. Pajiji, near, is starting up. Far away, Onfu that would pyre Sazatan's body was completed. Blink. Satan, who disappeared from the ranking. What had desired was. God Zeus, returns to Olympus. Hades, suddenly disappears, saying, I need to go higher. Who killed Satan? Some see it as the work of a hidden rancor. Articles poured out. Bakash of Satan's corpse slumped 93 RD floor. And around the same time, high ranker Kim Wu Wun breaks through the 93rd floor. Enters the 94th floor in the shortest period of time. The real rancor before your eyes. About Kim Wu Wun. Even words that didn't exist poured out. So far, Wu Wun had rarely responded to reporters' interviews. Perhaps that's why articles of a kind that were just speculation and not confirmed as fact began to pour out. Sudden rise in the rankings. Kim Wu Wun takes down Satan. Kim Wu Wun enters the top 20 rankings. Steep speed. Interview. Meeting Kim Wu Wun. In his hometown, Earth, he. Unverified things were reported as if they had simply met Wu Wun, or on the other hand, they wrote about why his ranking had risen. Who was the ranker who took down Satan? Opinions were divided on whether it was true. If the real Kim Wu Wun caught that guy, shouldn't he be higher than 20th place? The ranking is going up too suddenly. Don't they make adjustments at the management bureau? What are you talking about? They're raising the rankings too fast. Isn't the management bureau supposed to control it? What control? What kind of guys are in the management bureau? That's true. How many times have the large guilds tried to bribe them? They don't even take the bait. Then what the hell? As such, opinions on Yuan's ranking were divided. You damn fools. A thunderous roar echoed in the ranking management bureau, as if the building itself was about to collapse. How can you not know if Kim Yuan killed Satan? What nonsense is that? Well, there is some evidence. What kind of evidence? Shouldn't there be a record on the system? There is a record. That's the problem. What? The reports from the errand boys and the system records are different. Different. The management bureau was also in chaos. It was clear that Yuan and Satan had fought. The problem was whether the fight with Satan was one-on-one, one-on-many, or what Satan's condition was like at the time. Now that the administrator was dead and the outers had begun to move in earnest, the management bureau was short-handed. The only ways to verify it were through the system records and the eyes of the tower that some errand boys had spread out. Damn it, so that's why you've been raising the rankings so haphazardly. What else can we do? We can't not raise them at all. Are you kidding me? Hey, that's not what I meant, huh? Huh. Boom. Because of that, a storm raged through the management bureau. The errand boys who had been managing the 93rd floor were collectively disciplined, and the errand boy who had last met Yuan was demoted to the most inhospitable realm, hell. And at that moment, you have passed the 94th floor's test. Yuan continued to climb to the next and next floors. Climbing the tower like that. You have passed the 95th floor's test. You have passed the 96th floor's test. The 97th floors. Opening square bracket, closing square bracket. You have reached the 99th floor. Finally, Yuan challenged the tower's final test. You've come up quickly, the administrator of the 99th floor. The being in charge of the most difficult test known to date. Yuan, who stood before him, urged him on. Let's get started. From the 93rd floor to the 99th floor, Yuan had climbed the tower without resting, even while taking the administrator's tests. He had gotten a perfect score on every test. Yuan, who had been climbing the tower without taking a single break, was literally like a runaway train. Time is running out, is it? The administrator also noticed Yuan's impatience. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The world centered around the administrator and Yuan began to be colored differently. A phenomenon that signaled the start of the test. This test will probably be a little different from the ones you've taken. The 99th floor's test was one that separated ordinary players from rankers. Of the players who reached the 99th floor, more than half failed this test and were either frustrated or ended up dead. Furthermore, the difficulty of the test varied from player to player, so simply being strong was no guarantee that one would become a ranker. That was why rankers were called this in the tower. The chosen ones. Goo. A monstrous figure in the shape of a giant goat appeared before Yuan's eyes. It was different in size and shape. However, the monster's appearance resembled the outer god that had appeared on the first floor, Shub-Niggurath. And the next moment, please pass the test. Creak. A red line was drawn vertically across the body of the giant goat. Roar. The monster that had appeared as the test subject disappeared without a trace. It meant that it had been completely destroyed as a test subject. And so, on that day, you have passed the 99th floor's test. You have acquired 1 million points. You have passed all of the tower's tests. You have reached the 100th floor in the shortest amount of time. You have acquired 5 million points. Opening square bracket, closing square bracket. Your level has increased. Your rank is being measured by the Ranking Management Bureau. A rank already exists. Yuan had become a ranker. Chapter 386. The 99th floor's trial was special. A trial that was different for each individual. The trial of the 99th floor summons the existence that the player fears the most right before their eyes. However, that was merely a visible form. Having already experienced the trial once, Yuan knew that the existence that appeared before him wasn't real. Ma! A giant goat appeared with an annoying cry. Yuan looked up at his enemy that appeared as a drawing on a pure white background. Shub-Niggurath, huh! His most feared existence was Shub-Niggurath. Indeed, the bastard was one of the strongest enemies Yuan knew. A god of another world that was of a higher rank than even the foolish chaos. However, one shouldn't be fooled by appearances. This is just. Swish. Yuan pulled out his sword. Sword of Kusanagi. A trial to overcome fear. Swish. It was a single swing. The sharpest sword in the tower. That alone was enough to cut down the fake Shub-Niggurath that appeared before him. In the first place, an existence that didn't instill fear in him wasn't very strong. A red line appeared on Shub-Niggurath's body. At that moment, PSSS's Shub-Niggurath split in half, disappeared without a trace. You have passed the trial of the 99th floor. You have earned 1 million points. You have passed all of the tower's trials. Opening square bracket, closing square bracket. Messages appeared before him. Yuan turned his head to look at the administrator. He looked like an old man you could see anywhere in the neighborhood, stroking his long beard and patting his hunched back. Is there nothing you fear? He had seen countless rankers. No, all rankers had gone through his trials to climb up. Odin, Zeus, Sun Ogong, Heracles. All the other high rankers that made a name for themselves in the tower had gone through the same trials to climb up. But this was the first time a trial had ended so easily. Since it's fake, what is there to fear? If that was so easy, anyone could become a ranker. Then let's just say I'm a little special. Yuan also knew how difficult this trial was. But for Yuan, this was rather the easiest trial. It's difficult to realize and be convinced that what's in front of you is fake. Furthermore, Yuan had already passed this trial once. Of course, he had passed quite easily back then as well. As I've heard, you're a secretive one. Yuan was famous even among the administrators. He seemed to have many secrets, but his true identity wasn't known. Does Odin know something about you? Recently, the administrators were also interested in Odin's movements. The king of Asgard, who brought together the guilds that were scattered throughout the tower with the appearance of the outer god. The day of reconciliation was just around the corner, and it was an event that even the administrators would pay attention to. I wonder. The administrator looked at the place where Shub-Niggurath, who had just been cut by Yuan's hand, had disappeared. I wonder if what I just saw with my own eyes will actually happen. Swoosh. Like that, the space surrounding Yuan and the administrator gradually faded away. 100th floor reached. At the same time as feeling a little nauseous, a completely different landscape appeared over the disappeared background. Clouds in the sky, oily, solid ground below. Castles and buildings so tall that you had to look up to see the top, and a world filled with cool air. Yuan closed his eyes for a moment at the sight of the world he had just arrived in. I'm finally here, at the top. Kim Yuan breaks the record for the shortest time to reach the top. What's next? He became a ranker, but his rank hasn't changed. The Rank Management Bureau, it doesn't mean anything. Kim Yuan's next move. Which guild is he interested in? Muram Guild. Right now, we need to focus on Asgard's reconciliation. As if they had been waiting, numerous articles poured out. Yuan becoming a ranker was something that had already been anticipated. Even before Yuan first became a ranker, he had been given a ranking of high ranker, which meant that the Management Bureau had high expectations for Yuan's potential for growth. No one was surprised. Rather, there were some who thought it was later than expected. Furthermore, no one questioned Yuan's abilities anymore. That guy is already a top high ranker. At first, I thought the Management Bureau had made a mistake, but there are too many people who have seen it now. Yuan's abilities had already been proven through various incidents. Breaking Olympus, Ragnarok, Cheonma tournament, and this time, in the fight against Shub-Niggurath that appeared on the first floor. Yuan had proven his abilities in countless battles. Even though he was only ranked 28th, no one doubted that Yuan would soon become one of the kings of the tower, like Odin. There's a lot going on. Yuan secured a room on the 100th floor. The last test wasn't difficult, but he was tired from climbing the tower and didn't pay much attention to what was going on in the world. The first thing Yuan did when he arrived in a world that some people thought of as a dream was to get a nice hotel room, take a shower, and lie down on the bed. It really is a nice world. Yuan looked out the window at the world outside. A sky that was always clear and never dark, no matter the season. Oily ground that didn't dry out even though not a single drop of rain fell. A city full of luxury shops that rankers would covet, and plenty to see and do. There was a reason it was known as a world blessed by the gods. The most livable world in this tower was, of course, at the very top. Well, the only downside is that things are expensive. Well, that's the only downside since the accommodation is that expensive. Those guys on the first floor who you could say rip off another ranker who came up to the 100th floor, just like a pack of jackals. Even though it's great, it cost 200 points to use this room for a day. The cost of living is several times higher than in any other world. There was a reason why it was a good place to live. Tick. Yuan rolled around on the bed and tapped the kit. It was a margin he felt after a long time. Thanks to that, Yuan was able to learn a little bit about what was going on in the world. Asgard's Harmony, a place hosted by Odin. He didn't even know there was such a place, so he must have come up really busy. Yuan looked into other information. Strangely, almost half of the recent articles were related to him. 28th place. It seemed that the fight with Satan had influenced his rise in the rankings. Of course, if that were the case, he should have been in the top 20, not the top 10. Well, Yu-won glanced at the egg placed on the bed. I guess I know why. Other than that, there weren't many big things. Most of the articles were about Shub-Niggurath, who had appeared on the first floor, but there weren't many articles that were very informative. Of course, there couldn't possibly be a reporter who knew about the outer god at this point. Most, if not all, of them were just speculative articles ending in Kodathar. Some of them made pretty good guesses, though. Yu-won focused on Asgard's harmony again. December 31st. It's about a month from now. The deadline was set quite generously. It would probably take that much time for all the guilds to gather. Can I finish it by then? There were 2 things Yu-won had to do on the 100th floor. Yu-won got out of bed and left the accommodation to take care of the first one. Thud. The city was quite busy. Of the people walking down the street, everyone who could be considered a player was a ranker. Among them, there were those who opened shops like the residents of other floors, or those who worked as mercenaries. Those who were given a ranking but didn't care about it. Isn't that Kim Yu-won? I heard he came up this time. Is he just looking around? Yu-won's eyes flickered. But that was it. Most of the ranker level players belonged to guilds of a certain size, and they had seen their fair share of high rankers. Thanks to that, their interest quickly subsided. In the meantime, Yu-won went deeper and deeper into the corner. The tall buildings that seemed to reach the sky disappeared, and a dark, smelly alleyway appeared. And in such places, there were bound to be bad guys. Wang, bang, KWA 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 KWA. Thick, sharp needles pierced the ground at Yu-won's feet. Yu-won stopped walking and looked up. At the top of the alleyway, on the roof of a building, was a group looking down at Yu-won. Is that the guy? Oh, we did well to wait. We got one. Swoosh, low-level rankers appeared from all over the alleyway. But unlike their rough appearance, they were all rankers. On the other hand, despite their intimidating appearance, they were all rankers. Another group of rankers who had climbed to the 100th floor, so to speak, a group of hyenas on the first floor. Yu-won looked around the corner of the alley. There were quite a few of them. If you add up all the guys scattered nearby, it would probably be over 20. I've never seen that face before. Hey, wait a minute. I think this is the wrong way. The rankers who checked Yu-won's face up close hesitated. No matter how much they gave up their ranking, they knew how the world worked. Especially recently, if you ask who the most famous celebrity in this tower is, 9 out of 10 will probably say one name. Is that really Kim Yu-won? Wow, what if he just blows his skills? Oh, why are you always nagging about what you always do? The rankers who checked Yu-won's face split into teams. Suddenly, in the midst of the quarrel that unfolded before his eyes, blue ice shards rose from beneath Yu-won's shadow. Arthur, yes, finish cleaning up and come back. With that, Yu-won started walking again. And at the same time. Cheeser, the ground begins to freeze. Phew. Arthur, armed in blue armor, raised his head. I will obey. At the tip of his hand, a sword made of ice was created along with Excalibur. For him, who was a high-ranking ranker, the 20 or so mixed-up rankers in front of him were not even a light exercise. Suck, Jair, arg, oh, my legs, ice, it's ice, who has a fire skill? A bloody battle unfolded. Wherever you go, there are bound to be such gangsters in the alleys of the tower. Players and rankers on the lower floors were no different, plundering others' belongings in order to earn points comfortably. I didn't have time to get involved with those guys. Yu-won went deeper into the alley and headed for the stairs hidden on one side. Cheek, damp smell. Due to the narrow stairs, the sound of footsteps echoed against the walls several times. As I continued down the stairs like that. Who are you? Weruk. A small lantern that lit up the dark staircase appeared. The entrance fee here is a bit expensive. And the things in here are even more expensive than the entrance fee. If it's points, I have more than enough to spare. Points received as rewards each time a test is passed. In addition, each time a new record was set on each floor, a huge amount of points was earned from the administrator. At least 100,000 per floor. At most, it was up to several million points. The amount of points Yu-won had acquired so far was enough to pour out an article speculating on that amount. And since then, after saving adamantium, Yu-won had saved most of his points. I'm a little rich. Available points, 152,478,900 p. For today, Chapter 387. There were several ways to earn points. The first was the test. When a new player was introduced, he could earn points through the test. A large number of points could be earned, but the test was always a life-threatening event. Naturally, not many players preferred it. The second was simple labor. Selling items or using skills to create items like Hephaestus, such methods were usually not much different from ways to make money. The third was to establish a kingdom like Asgard or Olympus and collect taxes as a kind of protection fee. In this case, a large number of points could be earned, but a large number of personnel were also mobilized. And among them, Yuan had earned points in the first case. I see. Flash. The lantern rose up. With the light, his face could be seen clearly. There was a surprised black goblin there. It seems like you really have a lot of money. Creak. His tone of voice changed, and the corners of his mouth went up. The goblin couldn't contain his joy. It was because of the points Yuan revealed. I've been working here for quite some time, but this is the first time I've seen someone this rich. Can I go in? Yes. The goblin reached out his hand. The entrance fee is 100,000 points. 100,000 points. It was definitely too much for a simple entrance fee. With 100,000 points, even decent rankers could buy items that they would covet. An absurd condition. However, Yuan paid the amount without much hesitation. 100,000 points have been consumed. The goblin laughed out loud as Yuan paid the points in one breath. It's been a long time. A foreigner spending this much money here. Rumble. Between the dark staircases, the extinguished lanterns were lit. The movement of magic power was not felt. It was a flame created by a mechanical device, not magic power. Follow me. The goblin turned around and began to descend the stairs. Yuan followed the goblin. The width of the stairs began to widen gradually. And soon, wow, at the end of the stairs, a wide open space appeared. Entrance fee has been paid. You have arrived at the goblin's country. It was definitely daytime before going down the stairs. In the first place, there was no night in the world of the 100th floor, so no matter how much time passed, it could not become night. However, the sky of the place where they arrived after going down the stairs was definitely a moonlit night. 3 moons. Yuan looked up at the moons in the sky. I'm here, the land of goblins, where 3 moons rise. This was a world where only night existed without day. The reason why the world of the 100th floor was all day was because, conversely, a world of only night existed. Clank, 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 clank. Let's play Ihiradia. No, I'm old. Come on, Jokuna, come on, where did you get that accent? I heard that the young guys downstairs are talking like this these days. Come on, Joe Oda. They played instruments and danced, humming. Goblins were having fun, dancing and singing with great excitement everywhere. This place was always night, so the goblins, drinking parties never saw the day. Why, do you regret it? The goblin who followed Yuan chuckled. You spent 100,000 points to come to a place like this. Not really, well, you must have come here knowing something. The goblin's eyes narrowed as he looked at Yuan. Did you hear from Odin? Yuan nodded. That must be it. The goblin clicked his tongue at the fact that Yuan had come to know about their country. Well, of course, sure, here is the translation. Of course, why not? The goblin exclaimed in admiration at his memory. There probably aren't many fools who would spend 100,000 points to enter such a place without any information. That reckless bastard, I told you never to say it. Reckless bastard, it was what he said to Odin of the heavens. However, Yuan didn't find the goblin's words that strange. All the goblins living in this country were the same. The oldest race that has been with the tower since its history. Generally, among those who hadn't become rankers, the race known to live the longest was the dragon clan. They were born with magic, and as they aged, they accumulated a vast amount of magic in their hearts. The race that lived for thousands, tens of thousands of years was the dragon clan. However, the tower was vast, and there were bound to be other races with long lifespans besides the dragon clan. How long have you lived? I see you've heard that we live long lives. I could tell just from what you said earlier. At the very least, you've lived longer than Odin. Your tone is quite presumptuous, even knowing that. The goblin, who seemed amused, picked up a bottle of alcohol lying on its side. There was about half of a clear liquid left in the bottle, as if someone had taken a sip. Gulp, gulp, age, I'm not sure, maybe about 50,000 years. Or a bit more. You've lived a long time. Haha, your tone hasn't changed even after hearing my age. Not as much as you, but I've lived long enough. I realized that age doesn't really mean anything. That's true, age doesn't mean anything. There probably weren't many beings who could fully accept those words as much as goblins. After living for thousands, tens of thousands of years, age was nothing more than a meaningless accumulation of time. So, what business do you have in such a remote place? I want to meet the Goblin King. The king? The goblin's expression crumpled. To suddenly meet their king. It was a rather rude request. Paying the entrance fee was the bare minimum courtesy to enter the goblin country, but it didn't qualify one to roam around the country as they pleased. Nevertheless, the goblin looked at Yuan for a moment and pondered. The goblin stared intently at Yuan's face. He seemed to see money in his eyes. What goblins like the most is points. That was Odin's advice to Yuan when he told him about this country. Points. They're crazy about them. That's why everything in that country is expensive. A plate of food, even a sip of water. The goblins' greed was beyond imagination. Even the entrance fee alone was difficult for most rankers to pay. However, that didn't apply to Yuan. Points in possession, 152,378,900 p. He had this many points left even after paying 100,000 points. Even the enormous entrance fee didn't make a dent in Yuan's balance. 150 million points made even the wealthy goblin's eyes widen. It probably wouldn't be any different for the Goblin King. As expected, there might be a way. Yuan nodded at the goblin's answer. Then guide me, thud, as if it had been waiting for the answer. To your king. Yuan headed towards the castle visible in the distance. The goblin country was a small country. It was a piece of land that was too small to be called a country, about the size of a city. And the tall castle located in the center of it was a place built for the Goblin King alone. Yuan entered the castle, guided by the goblin. The goblin, who had been chattering about their country, suddenly turned to Yuan and changed the subject. Come to think of it, I feel like I've seen your face somewhere. They said that the goblin country was almost completely isolated from the outside world, and it seemed that was true. I'm a bit famous on the outside. Really, I thought so. Kim Yuan, right, you're quite famous on the lower floors these days. Click, the goblin let out a sound of admiration, marveling at his own memory. Apparently, he had gone outside when Yuan had first started making a name for himself in the tower a few years ago. But how did you get here? I climbed up, already, to the 100th floor. The goblin's eyes widened briefly. It had only been a few years since he had heard of Yuan. Up until then, Yuan was just a rookie, making a name for himself only in the lower floors. But in this short amount of time, he had already qualified as a ranker. The tower must be in an uproar again. Players who became rankers in the shortest amount of time were bound to receive attention. As a ranker, one's strength was one thing, but it also meant that they had high potential. But don't act too recklessly in front of the king. He is on a different level than any other player you've met so far. Click, the goblin grabbed the door. There was no sign of anyone, not even a mouse, in the vast castle. At the end of it was a thick iron door from which a strong smell of alcohol leaked out. Then go in. Creak. The goblin opened it without asking permission. As the closed door opened, the pungent smell of alcohol became much stronger. What appeared on the other side of the door was... Gulp. It was a culture shock. A man twice the size of Heracles. And a giant bottle of alcohol that was even bigger than the man's body. Gulp. The alcohol from the bottle he held in one hand flowed down his mouth and dripped down. As the giant man lowered the bottle back down. Clank. The clear sound of an emptied bottle echoed through the room. There was only one piece of furniture in the room, a large sofa where the man was sitting. But inside, it was all alcohol. It's all hard liquor. His face was hidden by the bottle, but at a glance, most of the alcohol here was hard liquor that even high rankers enjoyed drinking. There seemed to be a few alcohols for gourmets mixed in, but that was just a small part of it. Most of it was hard liquor made for getting drunk, so strong that even rankers couldn't handle more than a sip. Nice. His eyes were hazy, but the power contained within them could not be hidden. As he put down the bottle and looked at Yuan, there was a beast in his eyes. Unlike other goblins, his appearance was not much different from that of an ordinary person. The only thing that was different from a human was the two large horns. His eyes, which had been relaxed by the alcohol, now stared at Yuan. His eyes, which had regained their strength, reflected Yuan. Is this it, the one who wants to see me? Seemingly observing him, the Goblin King looked Yuan up and down. From the looks of it, he seemed to have known that Yuan would come here. Yuan gave him time to examine him sufficiently. Then, after a while, you're something. Flick. The Goblin King smiled, raising the corner of his mouth, and reached for another bottle of alcohol. Will you drink? I'm not much of a drinker. Is that so? That's a shame. If you don't know alcohol, you don't know life. Gulp. The Goblin King, who had brought a small bottle to his mouth, smacked his lips and asked. So, what did you come to see me for? I have points left over, but I have nowhere to use them. The reason why you had come here to find the Goblin King. How much was Gingnur? It was because he knew that there was a treasure hidden in this world that was hard to put a value on. Chapter 388. I didn't intend to talk about goblins from the start. Where did you get Gingnur? Someone asked a question during the meeting carefully. The conference hall became quiet in an instant at that question that was taboo even among colleagues. What? Why is the atmosphere like this? That's because Gingnur. Wasn't it something you shouldn't tell anyone? Oh, now that you mention it, just tell us comfortably. Don't be so stuffy. The last one was Son Goku, who was the most impatient. At those words, some colleagues poked Son Goku's side to give him a heads up. That's how taboo the subject of Gingnur was. However, I bought it from a goblin. Odin surprisingly answered obediently. The ears of the colleagues who had been dissuading him until just now perked up. As if to say, see, Son Goku pushed away Heracles, who was holding his arm from behind, and asked. From a goblin? Yeah, they were guys I met on the 100th floor. I've heard that there are goblins, but have you ever met them? So, don't you think I bought Gingnur from those guys? Odin reached out to Gingnur, which he had placed behind him. I was captivated the moment I saw it. I felt like it was my destiny, more than any beautiful woman. So emotional. I can't say it's the same as the first time, but I'm still captivated. It hurts like I'm tearing out my own heart every time I throw it. Wow, why is he like that? He's not like his usual self, he's over the top. He's like that whenever Gingnur is mentioned. Despite the sound of murmuring, Odin's praise for Gingnur did not stop. That's how much Gingnur was like life itself to Odin. All I could think about was getting it no matter what. But the points those guys offered were ridiculously high. How much was it? How much was it? There is no one in the world who hates money, and Gingnur was a top-notch item that everyone knew about. Moreover, Gingnur had never been auctioned before, so its value was also unknown. Curiosity was bound to be aroused. The price. It was probably 100 million points. The Goblin King muttered, recalling that time. The price at which Gingnur, which was owned by the goblins at the time, was sold to Odin. In order to do so, Odin had almost used up most of the fortune he had accumulated as the king of Asgard. Of course, he did not touch the state's property. What Odin touched was only his personal property as king. That guy lived hard, he made the Asgard top and did various businesses. It couldn't have been easy to collect 100 million points. The Goblin King smacked his lips in regret, not knowing that he would actually collect that much money. If I had known, I would have raised it to 200 million points. In the first place, Gingnur was an item whose value was literally what you called it, as its price was not fixed. But even so, 100 million points was a huge price that had never been traded before. Nevertheless, the Goblin King was not satisfied. You look a little better. The Goblin King looked at Yuan and gulped. 150 million points. Now that he knew how much points Yuan had, the Goblin King became greedy. So, what do you want? Judging by the fact that you came here after hearing Odin's words, it seems like you want something big. Before that, Yuan reached into his inventory. A huge bottle of alcohol was held in his small hand compared to the Goblin King. Suk, Kung, a flask of liquor as large as the Goblin King's head. The Goblin King showed interest, as if asking what this was. It was a pitch-black liquor bottle without any particular color. It's liquor that Dionysus has been saving. Dionysus. The Goblin King's eyes sparkled. Even though he was insignificant in the eyes of most high rankers, the story was different if it was about none other than Dionysus. He was the most well-known ranker for his liquor in this tower. Dionysus's liquor was special, so much so that half of his rank was known to be thanks to his liquor. Even the mass-produced liquor was luxurious enough to suit the tastes of rankers. Yet, the Goblin King couldn't help but be interested to hear that it was liquor that even Dionysus had been saving. It's grape wine that guy made a long time ago. Before that guy started his liquor business, he took his time to age it, hoping for the future, and completed it. Before Dionysus started his business. It's definitely not mass-produced. It's liquor that guy brewed himself. Liquor that Dionysus brewed himself was expensive. The value of liquor brewed by Dionysus was hundreds, if not thousands, of points per bottle. Since it was made before Dionysus started his business, it was natural that he would have put more effort into it than any other liquor. Furthermore, as you know, grape wine becomes more precious the more time you put into it. Of course, there are times when it can't overcome that time and is ruined, but that won't happen to liquor brewed by Dionysus. Gulp. Liquor that Dionysus himself had brewed, aged for thousands of years. If this liquor were to appear at an auction house, how much would it be traded for? The price would probably exceed imagination. No, it was clear that even if one had the money, they wouldn't be able to get their hands on it. I'll buy it. The direction of the trade changed in an instant. How much will it be? 100,000, or a million? Doesn't the price change depending on the time, place, and person? Yuan put the liquor bottle back into his inventory. The Goblin King's gaze followed the liquor bottle. Well, you're not a human, but a goblin. What do you want? The Goblin King asked, swallowing the saliva that had gathered in his mouth. Fortunately, it was the reaction he had expected. What the Goblin King likes best is liquor. Liquor that's mind-blowing. Yuan, who didn't really enjoy liquor, didn't really take Odin's advice to heart. However, that didn't mean he could just ignore the advice. Yuan helped Olympus and met Dionysus to ask him. Do you have any liquor you've been saving? Why, are you trying to have a drink with me? Dionysus, who had initially been cheerful at Yuan's question, couldn't help but stiffen his expression at Yuan's answer. No, I need one. Yuan openly asked for liquor. Furthermore, Yuan asked for the most precious of the liquors he had been saving. It was a brazen request, but at the time, Yuan was in a position not unlike a benefactor of Olympus. Both in the breaking of Olympus and in the subsequent rebellion of Hera. If it hadn't been for Yuan, Olympus would have been split in half, suffering a great blow. That meant, I believe you'll give it to me. That's. Why, can't you? Okay, I'll give it to you, I'll give it to you. It meant that Dionysus had no other reason to refuse. That was how Dionysus's liquor, which he had been saving for a long time, came into Yuan's hands under the pretext of repaying the favor Olympus had received. It was liquor that was perhaps the most precious in this tower, a precious liquor of which Dionysus had only 3 bottles left. I don't want much. One should always talk from a position of power. If one were to lose the initiative, they would have to lower their body, and then the relationship would naturally be divided into superior and inferior. Furthermore, this was the land of goblins. Yuan was not a guest, but rather a foreigner. However, for the Goblin King, this meant that Yuan was no longer a mere foreigner, but a business partner with Dionysus's wine. Whether it's 100,000 or a million, the amount doesn't matter. It seems you don't plan on simply selling it for points. It would be a waste to use such a good move for points. Of course, you'll be overflowing with points anyway. The corners of the Goblin King's mouth turned up. It was an interesting situation. The guy who came to propose a deal first was making the other party more anxious. Perhaps it was because he had prepared for this situation in advance. Tell me, what do you want? I want to borrow your sorcery. Sorcery, a technique that only a few rankers, including King Uma and Mimir, were proficient in. It was different from magic, and if you traced its roots, you would eventually find goblins. Sorcery, sorcery, he suddenly seemed to lose interest. The Goblin King reached for a different bottle. That's what you want, in the end. Gulp, he only took a sip, as if he wasn't after the taste. The Goblin King wiped the clear alcohol from his lips with the back of his hand and asked. What do you mean, borrow my sorcery? Do you want me to break a seal or curse? Or do you want me to read your fortune? The possibilities of sorcery were endless. Especially the Goblin King in front of him could be considered the creator of sorcery. He might look like a drunk old man on the outside, but Yuan needed his help. There are 2 things. 2, let's hear them first. The Goblin King gave a dull reaction, as if he would think about it later after hearing them. It seemed that Yuan's request was more obvious than he thought, so he had lost interest. Before that, whoosh, the color of Yuan's eyes changed. One was red, the other was golden. As the fire and gold eyes activated, the Goblin King's figure that entered Yuan's field of vision approached him with a different feeling than before. He's more dangerous than he looks. Shiver, shiver. A giant man with 2 horns and a human face. It was a mask. As he used the fire and gold eyes, the figure of a goblin with a completely different face began to faintly appear over the Goblin King's face. But only up to there. Even with the fire and gold eyes, all he could see was half of the Goblin King. Fire and gold eyes. The Goblin King was interested in the fact that Yuan had begun to see through his true nature with those eyes. No matter how ignorant goblins were of the world, they couldn't be considered residents of the tower if they didn't know about the great sage, Heaven's equal. He was currently one of the most powerful and influential beings in this tower. So you have that skill as well. Indeed, this is interesting. Whoosh, the Goblin King's hand covered his face for a moment. Then, rumble, fire and gold eyes, is grasping the true nature of Goblin King. True nature cannot be identified. Fire and gold eyes, is resisting, Goblin King's mask. Goblin King's mask, is. Messages floated before his eyes. The Goblin King's sorcery and the fire and gold eyes clashed. The fire and gold eyes burned fiercely to remove the Goblin King's mask, but the mask did not break and held on firmly. For a moment, what's so special about those eyes? At the Goblin King's question, Yu-Won stopped trying to see through his true nature. Really, he wondered how good-looking his face could be. There was no point in fighting pointlessly. I want to strengthen this skill. At the Goblin King's question, Yu-Won stated the first of the two reasons he had come to the Goblin Kingdom. Then, twitch, the Goblin King twitched one of his eyebrows and asked in disbelief. Are you talking about the Eye of Prophecy? Chapter 389. Prophecy. The moment that word was uttered, Wu Yun's expression quivered slightly. Outwardly, he tried his best not to show it, but inwardly, he was cheering enthusiastically. He really came to me. He mentioned Yejian before Wu Yun could speak first. At least it wasn't a waste of time, he thought. The key is Yejian. The conversation with Mimir after waking up. He emphasized, Yejian, more than anything else. It may be impossible for anyone else, but not for you. Wan Jiamjung is the closest skill to Yejian among the countless skills that exist in this tower. I know that too. The problem is where to get it. You have to meet a goblin. A goblin. Wu Yun's eyes lit up as if it were perfect timing, as he had planned to meet them anyway. And Mimir couldn't have missed Wu Yun's reaction. You know them. I heard it from Odin. Not the Odin here. Well, it's good that you know. Go meet them. You might find an answer. He wasn't sure. No matter how great a being he met, Yejian was the kind of skill that no one had ever gotten their hands on. And that was the same for Mimir, who had been cursed with the curse of knowledge. Warroar. The fire of Wan Jiamjung burned brighter and brighter. Meeting its gaze without avoiding it, the Goblin King asked. Do you know about Yejian? Huh, it's real, and your wish is big. The Goblin King scratched his head as if it were difficult. You know that you can't get it with just one drink, right? Yejian was such a special skill that even Dionysus, wine was called, just one drink. A skill that no one in this tower had ever acquired. Wu Yun was asking for that skill, which was only known to exist in legends. No, alcohol is not the problem. It would be difficult even if you offered all the alcohol in this tower. Just try hard, don't be lazy, heyo. As if it were ridiculous, the Goblin King looked at Wu Yun. Wan Jiamjung, the eyes of the great sage, who saw through truth and falsehood, and truth. There was a little interest in those eyes. Maybe really. A moment of contemplation. Then, the Goblin King opened his mouth. Gatekeeper. Yes, Your Majesty, please speak. Stop talking and just pick 20 smart guys. Yes. The goblin, who had asked back without realizing it, hurriedly raised his voice and replied. Yes, I understand. The goblin turned around and left the room in a hurry. Watching the goblin's back, the Goblin King clicked his tongue. He's just a fool who works as a gatekeeper. Do you need 20 people? Numbers don't matter. The Goblin King raised his hand and drew a circle with his thumb and forefinger. This is it, in the end. Point. Yeah, the way to gain foresight is nothing other than points. The Goblin King said to the puzzled expression. Points are the power to overcome the system and laws of the tower. It makes the impossible possible, creates something out of nothing. All of that comes from points. The power to break the law. It was an incomprehensible word. Have you heard of this saying? If you have points, you can even become a god. Goblins. I used to think that they were just a race obsessed with points. It's a saying we made. There must have been a reason for that. If you have points, you can even become a god. Eugene thought the saying was a bit of an exaggeration. It's just a capitalist saying that money is the best, like the saying, a landlord is above God. But it seemed to be different for goblins. Points are like a measure of strength. From now on, I'll show you how to use it. Swoosh. The Goblin King rose from his seat. His face was briefly visible above Wan Jiamjung, though only slightly. Watch closely. Goblins gathered in the castle one by one. It was smoother than I thought. Can it really be this smooth? Why, are you nervous? The Goblin King, who had disappeared for a while, approached Eugene from behind. I didn't notice when he came, and there was no sign of him. I never knew goblins were such a friendly race. If you have enough points, you can give us your liver and guts. And you're richer than anyone we've ever seen. Are you saying you're going to rip me off? Don't worry, we won't cheat you. It was a very smart choice to bring Dionysus, alcohol. In the end, it meant that they were working to rip him off. And I'm curious, quote. Is foresight really possible? For them too, it seemed like a kind of fun experiment. Swoosh, thud, the goblins carved letters on the floor. A list of unrecognizable languages. The Goblin King walked through them. Foresight is an eye that brings forward the order of time. Of course, it's called an eye, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of an eye. Thud, thud, as the giant Goblin King moved, the castle shook slightly. Susu, sususus, the Goblin King's mask was slowly peeled off. Normally, the face of a goblin would be considered a mask, but the one in front of me was the opposite. To him, the human face was the mask. And then, the moment the mask was completely removed, the Goblin King's mask disappears. You have seen the true form of the Goblin King. The Goblin King manifests. Creepy, creepy. Eugene couldn't help but tremble at the Goblin King's true form. That's what this guy was like. Cuckoo goo goo. He was just a big, boozy old man. Now I think I know why Odin thought so highly of him. Just in case, don't even think about fighting the Goblin King. While we were planning to go to the Goblin Kingdom, Odin said, looking at Son Goku with concern. Especially you, I'm most worried about when you go back. What? Why? He'll probably attack you as soon as he sees you. Do I look like an idiot? Can't I tell the difference between work and play? It's a wonder you've been able to tell the difference up to now. Do you want to fight right now? At that time, I didn't really understand why Odin was so worried about Son Goku. I just vaguely thought that the Goblin King must be that strong. But now that I see him in person, I think I understand a little bit. If that guy had seen him, he wouldn't have been able to hold back. The being before my eyes now was a monster. A huge monster that was difficult to gauge how big it was. The Goblin King wore a thick mask called Wanjiamjung, which made it impossible to fully grasp his true form, and concealed his own powerful entity. It's over. Swoosh. The Goblin King, who was carving words on the floor with other goblins, waved his hand at Yu-Won. Come this way. Thud, thud. Yu-Won followed the Goblin King's gesture and walked over the densely written words on the floor. It felt strange. It was just a series of simple letters that didn't feel like magic at all. As I stood on it, it felt familiar somehow. Are you ready? Yu-Won, who was standing on the words, looked back at the Goblin King. What preparation? I mean, are you mentally prepared? How can I prepare if I don't know what you're doing? We're going to time travel now. Time travel. Yu-Won had already used the clockwork to travel back in time. The time that Yu-Won was currently in was that time. Was he going to go to another time? The Goblin King continued to explain. That doesn't mean we're going to do real time travel. We're going to carve time. Tut, tut tut tut. As soon as he finished speaking, the letters centered around Yu-Won began to wriggle and move. About 20 goblins surrounded them. They began to cast spells, moving their magic power as they tapped the floor. I wonder if this method will be able to create a vision. Is it possible to violate the law and see the future instead of the past? The letters came up Yu-Won's body. It depends on how you do it. Swish, swoosh, countless letters covered Yu-Won's body, blocking his view. Wu-Won did not refuse. The test began. By the time it was hard to move a finger. Dokubi's time reacts to Wanjiamjung. 100,000 points have been used. Points will be continuously used according to the time. Do you accept Dokubi King's trade? It felt like he had slept for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, Wu-Won was standing in the middle of countless scenes. It's like a movie. Countless scenes passed by. Too many to count. Some of the scenes were familiar, mixed in with scenes he didn't know. That's when I first met Sun Ogong. It was a moment he could never forget. One of the few times he had been defeated. Wu-Won had been shocked by his fight with Sun Ogong. This tower is really big, and there are a lot of strong guys. And next, that's when Hercules saved me. One day, while fighting his comrades, Hercules was ready to die instead of Wu-Won. Hercules turned his broad back and stood in front of Wu-Won, blocking the outer gods alone. I really thought I was going to die. Suddenly, Wu-Won wondered what Hercules was doing now. Maybe he wouldn't remember, but anyway, Hercules was a lifesaver to Wu-Won and a hero like no other. And that is another scene. When Odin threw Gungnir and blocked Shub-Niggurath, all sorts of scenes appeared. Strangely, there were many scenes that Wu Won knew. What is all this? As that thought came to his mind. What is that? A scene caught Wu Won's eye. Crunch. Odin being eaten by Shub-Niggurath. He had no memory of seeing this. That wasn't all. Snap. Hercules' arm breaking. Not just one arm, but both arms were broken. And that scene was showing the time when he was fighting the outer gods to protect Wu Won. Stab. His head felt like it was going to explode. The scenes unfolding before his eyes grew exponentially over time. They piled up and piled up, becoming a huge ocean that enveloped Wu Won. And the reason it was even crazier was, I can see all of this. Countless scenes that he couldn't even count were all coming into Wu Won's eyes. What are all these? Wu Won looked at the scenes coming into his eyes and became certain. Things that might have happened in the future. Dozens, hundreds of thousands. Countless futures numbering in the hundreds of millions. Countless possibilities that could not be quantified by numbers were unfolding before Wu Won's eyes. Chapter 390. Tut, 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 tut. The letters that covered Wu Won's body scattered and were replaced with new ones repeatedly. And watching the letters that were written and erased. It started. The Goblin King muttered. The Goblin King, who was watching Wu Won with interesting eyes while crossing his arms, had 20 other goblins kneeling around him. What is it? The Goblin King turned his head to the question he heard right next to him. Of the 20 goblins sweating, the one who seemed to be the most relaxed. He was the Goblin King's guardian goblin. Can you see these letters? I can see them. I can't read them all because most of them are too fast. Then, how many of them do you think will remain? How many? The letters that repeatedly disappeared and were engraved. The guardian goblin answered the combination of the letters. Most of them seem to be meaningless letters. To be exact, they become meaningless. In the end, they are things that will not happen. Then why are you making such a fuss? It's impossible to see a single, set future. But it's quite possible to pick out the one with the highest probability among dozens, hundreds of millions of cases. That's. At the Goblin King's words, the guardian goblin realized the true nature of the eye of prophecy. Impossible. Yes, it's impossible. That's for anyone. Your head will explode. Can't you see it if you look at Mimir? Mimir, the wisest being in this tower, who drank the water from the well of Yggdrasil and was cursed with knowledge. He could not withstand the overload of knowledge and eventually fell into the curse of knowledge. I know. Then why? That's why we need the flower of comprehension. Warark. Among the countless letters engraved on his body, a bright red flame bloomed over the flower of comprehension that was revealed to Wu Won's eyes. To control that curse. Warark, the flower of comprehension, reacts to the goblin's time. Grasping the essence of magic. Distinguishing between falsehood and truth. Among the countless scenes unfolding before his eyes. Most of the scenes disappeared like burnt paper. False times that could not and would not happen. It's not about seeing the future that will actually happen. The goblins, magic was not universal. No matter how many points you paid, it was impossible to confirm a future that had not yet occurred. The eye of prophecy was not an existing skill, but a skill that was believed to exist. Of the countless futures that will come, see the future that is most likely to happen. Among the hundreds of millions of possible futures, Wu Won had to find the future with the highest probability. That's why Wu Won's role started from here. Countless futures were revealed through the Wan Jiamzhang, and he chose a few of them. And he erased the rest except for those few. Warururuk. You have predicted something that will happen someday. Your foresight increases. Jiguk. As I barely managed to block the scenes that came into my eyes like a tidal wave, my head felt like it was going to burst. Numerous scenes poured into my head. Predictions about countless possibilities. The probability of billions, tens of billions of possible events. And those things were refined and refined to go beyond expectations and reach the realm of foresight. A vision of the future. It seemed that seeing the future wasn't an ability that could be easily obtained. This was closer to a highly probable prediction than a vision of the future. Jiguk, jiguk. It felt like my brain was throbbing. My head couldn't handle all the information coming into my eyes. Is this how Mimir felt? I never thought there would come a day when I would understand Mimir like this. There were two options at this point. Give up here, or endure like Mimir and fall into the curse of knowledge. I would have given up if it were the old me. No matter how tempting the vision of the future was, I couldn't fall into a curse where I would spend most of my 100 years asleep like Mimir. But my greed was too much. Fortunately for Yuan, Mimir, who had made the same mistake in the same situation, was by his side. Humans can't even see an inch ahead of them. No, that goes for all races. In the distant future, one of those images appeared before Yuan's eyes. I wanted to know too much. I wanted to see what I couldn't see, know it, and I wasn't satisfied with that, so I wanted to know everything that would happen in the distant future. Greed for knowledge, that was the biggest reason why Mimir was ruined. In the end, I failed. But it was also a success. It was a half success. Are you talking about the curse of knowledge? Not only that. If the curse of knowledge was all there was to it, Mimir probably wouldn't have been so pessimistic about his situation. It didn't matter if it was only 1 day out of 100 years. He wanted to see the end of knowledge, and he thought the end that knowledge pointed to was seeing the complete future. But he couldn't see the future. The future I can see is only fragmentary. It has a high probability, but it can't be said to be certain. You're talking about a vision of the future. Yes, that's what I wanted to get. That was why Mimir called his knowledge a half success and a failure. His knowledge presented countless possibilities, but in the end, he couldn't narrow it down to one. Mimir spoke, recalling the time when he drank from the well of Yggdrasil. Don't try to see too far. It's a problem for you and me. We look far and can't see a foot in front of us. A foot in front. Yuan's pupils moved. He saw a picture right in front of him. It wasn't the fight with Outer that he had been watching until now, but a scene that was happening in the nearest place. Yuan was surrounded by goblins. And the Goblin King's applause and the surprised looks of the other goblins. Don't look far, is it? Swoosh. Yuan pulled out a small vial from his inventory. Ambrosia. Hash it is the sap of the golden apple tree. The exact identity is unknown. Hash random stat increase when consumed. Hash mental power is strengthened when consumed. Hash increased resilience when consumed. Hash when applied to the body, strong resistance to all attributes increases. Hash physical defense increases when applied to the body. Hash magic resistance increases when applied to the body. Ambrosia. It was an item extracted from the golden apple tree that made Achilles a demigod. It was a kind of potion that was categorized as an item that was more difficult to obtain than the stars in the sky. And thanks to that, I'll take your advice. Anyway, it was an item that I had been saving because I didn't need to use it right away. Yuan opened the stopper of the potion containing the ambrosia, thinking that now was the right time. Pop, but I've been a bit greedy since before. He brought the opened bottle to his mouth and poured it all in one gulp. Glup, you have consumed ambrosia. Mental power is greatly enhanced temporarily. Ambrosia resists Goblin's time. Wan Jiamjung controls Goblin's time. Curse of knowledge is weakened. Curse of knowledge is until the last remaining drop. Yuan, who had poured all the ambrosia into his mouth, dropped the empty bottle to the floor. Crash. I won't give up. Certainly. Crash. Yuan dropped the bottle he was holding. Yuan's body, which had poured a clear potion into his mouth, was already densely covered with black letters. He's in a completely different world from us. At this point, it's time to go crazy and collapse. I have to admit that mental strength. The goblins who were using the spell shook their heads with tired faces. The goblins who were using the spell knew. The effect of the spell being carved into Yuan's body was the infusion of countless information and possibilities. The power of the spell, regardless of Yuan's will, would present him with things to come, and will present them again. The problem is that it is Yuan's job to control it. It was common for ordinary people to have their heads burst or go crazy with the future constantly unfolding before their eyes. However, Yuan had a way to control it. I thought you only had one Wajen Jiamjung pill. No, I thought it was one. You were hiding ambrosia. The Goblin King looked at the broken glass shards scattered on the floor. A bottle that contained ambrosia. Thanks to that, Yuan was able to control the spells engraved on his body a little more. Ambrosia was an elixir, but it was also like a drug at the same time. Its effect instantly amplified the user's psychic power several times over. Perhaps it was the most necessary item in this situation. The Goblin King muttered as if it was funny. You're definitely not an average bastard. If this continues, I might really achieve precognition. Well, the Goblin King chuckled at the Guardian Goblin's words. If it continues like this, it would be good enough if you don't go crazy. Excuse me, or you might end up sleeping for 90 years out of 100. Originally, you would have ended up like Mimir, but you're getting much better. Mimir failed to gain precognition because he couldn't handle all that knowledge and fell into the curse of knowledge. Of course, the two were a little different. Unlike Mimir, who gained wisdom through the spring water of Yggdrasil. Yuan was infused with information through spells. However, the method might be different, but the result would be the same. Brain overload, the resulting mental breakdown, or a long sleep. Thanks to ambrosia, he had found some stability, but it wasn't enough to reverse the outcome. Of course, if a great shaman helps him here, it might be different. This is the best we can do. 20 elite goblins, including the Goblin King, who was the center of the spells. The precognition was something that even they couldn't create with their spells. That's right, we have our limits. Thud, a footstep entered the Goblin King's castle. But there's one guy. The Goblin King looked back at the giant man who had been drawing his attention for a while. There's someone better. Goo. Other goblins knelt down one by one as the giant being's presence weighed down on the castle. The Goblin King had a welcoming expression on his face, even as the air grew heavy. A tall man looked between Yuan, who was surrounded by the Goblin King and spells. The Goblin King greeted him. Welcome, Wuma, a monster who declared himself to have no enemies under the heavens, having pacified the heavens. The great sage, equal to heaven, Wuma Wong, glared at the Goblin King. Chapter 391. I won't ask you what's going on yet. Thud, thud, the Horse King passed by the Goblin King. It seemed like he was about to swing the soul-stealing rod in his hand at any moment. However, what caught his eye was Yuan standing in the middle of the goblins' sorcery. It seems like we should deal with this guy first. Yuan looked dangerous in the Horse King's eyes. He didn't know when he would end up like Mimir. The process of gaining the eyes of prophecy was that dangerous and extreme. What was needed now was to stabilize the sorcery. You said you owed me a favor. It seems like it was true. I know, the Horse King replied coldly and reached out to Yuan. The guardian goblin flared up at the Horse King's reply. That insolent, just leave him alone. But your majesty. Right now, business comes first. Just think about that. The guardian goblin shut his mouth at the Goblin King's words. Yuan, who was standing before him, was certainly a big fish. With over 150 million points, Yuan was richer than anyone who had ever visited the Goblin country. As such, this job could never fail. However, now, the success of the job was in the hands of someone other than a goblin. Can you be trusted? Come to think of it, you wouldn't know. It was a ridiculous thing to say. He doubted the skills of none other than the Horse King. When it comes to sorcery, that guy is a bit better than me. Excuse me, the guardian goblin looked surprised. The oldest goblin, the Goblin King who created sorcery. There was a sorcerer in this tower who was better than him. The guardian goblin's gaze turned to the Horse King. Before he knew it, the Horse King had put his hand on Yuan's head and was performing sorcery. The Horse King was going to do something about the sorcery that 20 goblins, the Goblin King, and even Yuan, the target of the sorcery, couldn't control. It's been a while since I've seen his skills. The eyes of the Goblin King looking at the Horse King softened. Throb, throb, it felt like his head was going to explode. Wasan Jiamjung shook precariously before the countless scenes that entered his eyes. He wondered what would have happened if ambrosia hadn't been there. Should I give up here? The thought crossed his mind that he might end up like Mimir if he made a mistake. At this rate, he might be consumed by the sorcery being infused in his head and spend most of his life in a deep sleep. Waruk, Wasan Jiamjung, controls the Dokubi's time. Wasan Jiamjung reads the Dokubi's time. Wasan Jiamjung envisions what will happen someday. Predictive power increases. Curse of knowledge intensifies. Curse of knowledge. The messages that appeared before his eyes also gradually warned him of danger. Among the countless hours that appeared before his eyes, it became increasingly difficult to distinguish what would actually happen and what wouldn't. His head was dizzy. He felt not only a simple headache, but also his consciousness fading away. On second thoughts fail mosquito. Concentrate a little more. Yuan suddenly came to his senses at the voice in his head. Where had he heard that voice before? It was so sudden and dizzying that he couldn't immediately recall whose voice it was. Yuan shook his head twice. The voice continued at Yuan's reaction. Focus on it for now. The dizziness subsided slightly. Thanks to that, his scattered focus returned. Concentrate on your eyes. Don't try to control the knowledge with your head, but try to see it as it is with your eyes. It was a trustworthy voice. Only then was Yuan able to recall the owner of the voice. Uma Wong. Thinking about it, he was there even when he wasn't the Dokubi King. The greatest sorcerer in this tower. He hadn't been able to see him in the future because he had been executed in the heavenly prison. The power that Wasan Jiamjung possesses is to distinguish between falsehood and truth. The time you see is no different. The effect of the sorcery engraved on Yuan's body was to infuse predictions and foresight about the future in the form of knowledge, and to visualize that time. And the power of Wasan Jiamzheng was to discern the fake, what wouldn't happen. Uma Wang was telling him to focus on that. However, of course, if it's only what comes into your eyes. Jikan, the definitive reason for the overload that was hitting his head. That was because of the countless other predictions that were being directly fed into his head, as well as the scenes that were being visualized through his eyes. Don't worry, Wua, countless scenes began to unfold before Yuan's eyes. I'll take care of things from here. Hundreds of millions of scenes unfolded at once. Amidst the overwhelming influx of images, Yuan had no choice but to focus on the Wangyamzheng, just as the Demon King had instructed. As if by magic, the headache in his head disappeared. Now, he could finally focus on what he could see. Distinguishing between truth and falsehood. Click, click, click. Whoosh, the Wangyamzheng burned fiercely. It illuminated everything within his sight, and one by one, the things that would never happen were burned away and disappeared. And as that process repeated itself, the Wangyamzheng illuminates things that will happen someday. You have repeatedly foreseen the future. Your ability to foresee the future is increasing. The Wangyamzheng repeatedly illuminates the future. The Wangyamzheng is exerting an ability that it is not capable of. You have partially met the conditions of the hidden piece. You have acquired the Eye of Prophecy. Click, click, click. All of the letters that were engraved on Yuan's body gathered in his eyes. It was a strange sight. As soon as the Demon King touched it, the letters moved as if they were alive. The Demon King was single-handedly controlling the spell that the 20 goblins and the Goblin King had created. Amazing. The Guardian Goblin couldn't help but acknowledge the Demon King's abilities. What kind of trick had he used? It was difficult even when 20 goblins moved with one mind and one purpose. However, like a larger flame consuming a smaller one, the Demon King's spell had devoured all of the other goblins' spells. The Guardian Goblin thought he understood why the Goblin King had acknowledged the Demon King's abilities. He couldn't help but acknowledge it. Click, and just like that, the power of all the spells that the Demon King had led were engraved in Yuan's eyes. Dozens of Guardian Goblins, the Goblin King, and even the Demon King. The spells of all of them were engraved in the eyes of a single human. And in a very stable form, at that. The Demon King is one thing, but that human is amazing too. Aside from the fact that the Horse King is the Horse King, that human is also incredible. And Wangyamzheng had the power to perceive the truth among those many futures. The power of sorcery was not something that could be handled without the spiritual power to accept it, aside from simply having a strong or weak body. The sorcery that had been carried out in that way all came to an end. Siror, the strength left the knees of Wu Wan, who had been standing in the middle of the goblins. Thud, the Horse King grabbed Wu Wan's arm. Wu Wan, who had almost collapsed to the floor as it was, lifted his head and looked up at the Horse King. As expected, how did you come here? After dying and coming back to life, that's the first thing you're curious about. I didn't die and come back to life. Wu Wan raised his hand and covered his eyes for a moment due to the pain he felt in his eyes. Wu Wan, who had put strength into his relaxed legs and stood up, looked at the Horse King with furrowed brows. Because of the Horse King's height, which was well over 2 meters, Wu Wan had to tilt his head halfway up just to make eye contact with him. It's not like something got in your eye or anything. It's similar. My eyes are like that. Sook. When Wu Wan moved his hand away, a crimson pattern and sorcery appeared over his eyes. Pupils inscribed with countless letters. The moment he saw those eyes, the Horse King was able to be certain. You succeeded. Yes. Wu Wan nodded his head at the pain he felt in his eyes and the scene and voices that unfolded before his eyes. For now, Wangyamzheng did not disappear. Instead, one of Wu Wan's eyes gained new power. Eye of Prophecy, hash rank, SS+, hash proficiency, 0.00%. Hash this is an immature Eye of Prophecy. As of yet, it is closer to a highly probable prediction than a prophecy. Hash depending on the proficiency, it is possible to see more accurate and distant futures. Just looking at the description of the skill, it was hard to tell just how great of a skill it was. It was obvious. It must be a problem with the proficiency. No matter what skill it was hard to expect a great effect from the moment it was first acquired. Depending on the proficiency, the effect could differ by several times, so he couldn't even be sure whether or not the future he saw through the Eye of Prophecy right now was a definite future. Of course, for now, I can supplement the problem to some extent with Wangyamzheng. The eye of prophecy was a skill that showed the most probable future among countless futures that were not accurate. Won Jiamjung had the ability to grasp the truth among those numerous futures. The two skills possessed similar concepts, so Won Jiamjung could supplement the shortcomings of the low-level Yamjin. It's half-baked. The Demon King recognized the Yamjin that Yuan had acquired. How? Right after the question, Yuan recalled that the Demon King's sorcery played a big part in obtaining the Yamjin. Yes. Not yet, not yet. Yuan believed that this eye would one day become an eye that could see the real future. Right now was only the beginning, and someday he would be able to look into the future sight. Don't overuse it. It's a dangerous power. Yuan nodded at the Demon King's warning. He already knew from overusing Yamjin. The more he tried to see the distant future, the more accurately, Yamjin would become a power that would ruin Yuan. That's why it's still half-baked. Enough with the nagging, and how did you get here? The Demon King must have headed up much earlier than Sun Ogong. The final test for players to gain divinity, which took place on the 100th floor. The Demon King had disappeared for quite some time after challenging the test. He thought that maybe the Demon King had failed the test and died, but the Demon King's ranking still remained. But then he suddenly appeared in a place like this. I came here because I had something to see. How did you know I was here? Not you. Quote. Yuan followed the Demon King's gaze. Goblins who were glaring at them with hostility. The Demon King, who was unusually aggressive, was holding an iron cudgel in his hand. And at the end of his gaze was the large Goblin King. It seemed like he somewhat knew what the something to see was that the Demon King had mentioned. Was that your business here? As expected, I think I'm done with the urgent stuff. Quack. The Demon King raised his iron cudgel. The power known as the Great Strength King dwelled in his hand that gripped the iron cudgel. How about we start now? It seems you've grown quite a bit. Tisk, tisk, tisk. On the Goblin King's face. The human disguise faded, revealing the fierce face of a goblin with two horns. Let me see your skills. Chapter 392. The atmosphere was stiflingly oppressive. The Goblin King, escorted by 20 guardian goblins, headed out of the castle. No one said a word. Yuan ran, looking at the goblins and the back of the Horse King as they moved away. What is their relationship? Yuan didn't know much about the Horse King either. He was a figure that didn't exist in the future, and all he knew was what he had heard from Sun Wukong. He was the most trusted Hung. A simple and clear explanation. But there was no further explanation. Because Sun Wukong didn't like talking about the Horse King. I should have listened more closely back then. But he had heard a little bit. That he was the best warlock in the tower. Odin also acknowledged that, but he held back on comparing him to the Goblin King. The Horse King and the Goblin King. Who was better out of the two? If it were the past, it would have been the Goblin King, but... Yuan looked at the Horse King facing the Goblin King in the sky. It's different now, and the Goblin King felt it too. That the Horse King in front of him was different from the Horse King he knew, who was imprisoned in the prison of the heavens. What happened in the past 1,000 years? I thought you were rotting in prison. Thud. At the Goblin King's question, the Horse King shook his head from side to side. I don't know. Ah, right, I suppose. Crack. The hand holding the soul-reaping cudgel tightened. The Goblin King clenched his fist against the Horse King's momentum. And then, creak, a long black cudgel resembling the Horse King's soul-reaping cudgel was created in the Goblin King's hand. The Goblin King, who was ready, swung his cudgel. Come, bang, a strong wind blew around the Horse King, who stepped on the air. Crash, the clouds in the sky broke apart, signaling the start of the fight. Thud, whoosh, the Horse King's soul-reaping cudgel and the Goblin King's cudgel clashed. Boom, the ground a considerable distance away from the collision sank deeply. Of course, the other goblins were also affected by the collision. We're caught up in it. Let's spread out for now. If we spread out, how can we protect the king? Do you think we have time to be fighting each other? Bam, arg, one of the guardian goblins was caught in the Demon King's club swing. The guardian goblin was flattened on the floor and buried in the dented ground, and Yuan watched the scene quietly. Bam, bam, bam. It was a chaotic battle. Fists collided, and the Vajra and the Demon King's club clashed. They were both incredibly strong monsters. Yuan watching the two fighting stuck out his tongue. Someone's figure overlapped the one of the Horse King fighting the Demon King. His strength has surpassed the current Heracles. Even before this, the Horse King was a ranker who was strong enough to be called the King of Strength. In terms of strength, he was second only to Heracles. But now, he was showing even greater strength. Perhaps it was thanks to the divinity he gained after passing the 100th floor trial. Still, he's not as good as Heracles, who passed the 12 labors and gained divinity. The important thing was that the Horse King's abilities weren't limited to strength. Thud, the Demon King's movement as he swung his club suddenly stopped. The Demon King's eyes, which had stopped moving in an unnatural position, scanned his limbs. The small letters etched on his clothes. You're fast. Swish, the Horse King's hand moved down. And at that moment, rumble, rumble, the Demon King's clothes became as heavy as a mountain. Fall, boom, the Demon King fell to the ground. He hurriedly raised his hands and tried to tear his clothes. But at that moment, boom, the Horse King's Vajra fell on the Demon King's head. Your Majesty, how can this be? The guardian goblins who had been watching the battle couldn't take it anymore and started to move. The Horse King's Vajra didn't stop. At this rate, the Demon King's defeat was almost certain. He'll be fine. In Yuan's eyes, the battle changed. They're both good at sorcery. And at that moment, thud, the Horse King's knee buckled. The letters etched on the Horse King's body as he swung the Vajra. They weren't much different from the ones etched on the Demon King's body. Is it the same spell? When did you? The guardian goblins were bewildered. They looked around Wu Yian one by one. Wu Yian seemed to have noticed the effect of the spell inscribed on Umoo's body a beat faster, even though they were far more capable when it came to spells. Of course, Wu Yian hadn't said what he did after noticing the inscribed spell. So this is how it works. Precognition. Wu Yian had tested the skill's effect in just a few seconds. It was certainly a great ability to be able to see a few moments into the future. It's not very efficient yet, though. Wu Fu. Wu Yian closed his eyes again. He was still tired because he had just acquired the skill. There was no need to push himself to test the skill now. Umoo and the Goblin King rose from their seats again. Despite their heavy bodies and clothing, the two of them aimed their fists and weapons at each other again. Bang, 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 it was a real fist fight. As if they had promised each other, neither of them used any skills. They stood with their legs firmly planted on the ground. The two of them fought a fist fight, bearing a weight like a mountain. Bang, Umoo's fist hit the Goblin King's stomach. The Goblin King's body, which had been resisting stubbornly, shook. The next thing that happened was that the hunchbacked cudgel lifted the Goblin King's jaw. Cracks slowly began to appear. It's almost over. In a fistfight like this, once you start to falter, it's over. Knowing this, the Goblin King also raised his hands. I give up. Thud, the hunchbacked cudgel, which had been swung at the Goblin King's head again, stopped. An abrupt situation. What the heck? He actually stopped after a single word of surrender. Is it ending this easily? Wu Yian, who didn't know the relationship between the two, wondered what was going on. Before the fight, Umoo had provoked the Goblin King as if he had a grudge against him. About the promise, I'll keep it, then that's it. SRRR. The spell inscribed on the Goblin King's clothes disappeared. The same was true for Umoo. The two of them released the spells they had cast on each other and extinguished the fighting spirit they had raised throughout their bodies. The ground and the Goblin King's castle were in shambles because of the fight. After confirming that the castle he was staying at had flown away, the Goblin King clicked his tongue briefly. Tisk, it's completely unusable. The Goblin King, who was looking at where the castle had been with regret, turned his head and looked at Wu Wan. You said there were two things you wanted to do. A sudden question. As Wu Wan nodded, the Goblin King handed the bat he was holding to another goblin and said, I'll do the other one tomorrow. Make the deposit to that guy over there. The Goblin King pointed to a goblin on one side with his finger. Then, a goblin approached Wu Wan for the deposit, and another goblin hurriedly brought alcohol. The Goblin King took a sip from the large bottle of alcohol and walked somewhere. It seemed that something had happened because of a certain promise he had made with Wuma King. 10 million points. A hand reaching out in front of Wu Wan. The goblins used quite a lot of points to create the predictive egg. Of course, the 10 million points they requested would include not only the points they used this time, but also their labor costs. 10 million points. It was an expensive price that made his jaw drop, but considering the predictive egg, it wasn't too expensive. Wu Wan paid the price without hesitation. 10 million points have been used. A broad smile formed on the goblin's lips. Just as there was no one in the world who hated money, goblins liked points even more than humans. Most of these points would probably be used for their drinks, though. Wu Wan didn't care where they spent the points. Is everything done? Swoosh. A presence felt from behind. Wuma King, who had been waiting for the calculation, touched his hungry stomach with one hand and said, I'm hungry, let's eat. Most of the goblins, meals were closer to drinking parties than meals. The concept of a meal was vague to them. For goblins, food was just a snack to drink alcohol with, not a means to fill their stomachs. The restaurant that Wuma King followed him to was a noodle shop that sold noodles, boiled pork, and makgeolli. They were quite familiar dishes to Wu-won. He didn't know what kind of animal the meat was made from, but at least it looked no different from the boiled pork and noodles that Wu-won knew. The food came out like that. It'll probably suit your taste. I don't know what they're made of, but it's a pretty old restaurant. The Horse King picked up his spoon without hesitation. It was quite a familiar action. From his steps into the restaurant to his recommendation of the restaurant. It didn't seem like it was his first or second time here. Have you lived here? To Yuan's question, the Horse King, who had taken a spoonful of the soup, nodded his head. The taste is still the same. Still the same. That meant he had been here before. Yuan picked up a spoon and took a spoonful of rice into his mouth. Indeed, the soup's taste was a little different from the soup Yuan knew, but it was definitely a restaurant worth recommending. Since when have you lived here? The conversation continued with the meal. Since I was born. But you're not a goblin. I found out later that I was a monster. I thought I was a goblin because I got along with goblins. His words were light, but their content was not so light. To live without knowing whether he was a goblin or a monster. Yuan turned his head and looked at the other goblins in the restaurant. None of them were human or monster. How did that happen? Well, it's a long story. The Horse King put off answering. It seemed better to talk about it later rather than eating and talking. The Horse King wouldn't have brought it up at all if he wanted to keep it a complete secret, so Yuan decided to wait. As the soup, which had been plentiful, was almost at the bottom. The Horse King brought up another topic. Where did Ogong go? I texted him, but I haven't heard from him about what he's doing. I thought he would look for Sun Ogong first after the test, but it seemed like he had come here first. That meant the fight against the Goblin King was that urgent for the Horse King. He left to find heaven. Heaven, yes, I think it must be somewhere in this tower. I know where that is. Yes, Yuan doubted his own ears. You know, heaven was a place that no one knew where it was, and no one knew if it even existed. The Buddhist scriptures there were also the only clue to unlocking Sun Ogong's golden hoop. But the Horse King knew where heaven was. Seeing Yuan putting down his spoon without realizing it, the Horse King asked in surprise. But why is Ogong going there? Chapter 393. Yuan talked about the golden hoop that Son Goku had acquired. The power he had obtained from the test and the golden hoop that was sealing that power. And that there was a place called Buddhism that could handle that golden hoop. There was something like that there, isn't there? By the time they finished talking, they had almost finished eating. Wu Ma Wang, a big eater, finished eating after emptying out 10 bowls of noodles and boiled pork. I don't know much either. You said you knew earlier. I just said I knew, but I don't know what's there. I've never been there myself. Yuan was about to ask what it was, but he nodded his head. Of course, if India and Buddhism were that easy to find, Son Goku would have found them already. Well, if he's looking for it that badly, there's a way to help. Then please help. Let's finish what we have to do here first. After finishing his meal, Wu Ma Wang took a sip of alcohol for the first time in a long time. The alcohol brewed by the goblins didn't taste as good as the one made by Dionysus, but it was still quite flavorful. Wu Ma Wang made a satisfied expression as he drank the goblins' alcohol for the first time in a long time. No matter how expensive or delicious the alcohol was, there was nothing as valuable as something mixed with memories. What was that promise? The fight with the Goblin King. Wu Ma Wang had won that fight and received the reward for the promise. He asked me to build a tomb for the monsters. A tomb? There was a war between goblins and monsters a long time ago. War. It was a story so old that even Yuan didn't know about it. Not many people in the tower knew about goblins, and the monsters were also on the verge of extinction. There weren't many monsters left alive. Except for me and Wukong. Then you were born after that war. Besides, I told you to call me your hung. You make me feel too old. I'll do it later. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't bring himself to call him hung. Wu Ma Wang and Son Goku were sworn brothers. The thought of being between them and calling Son Goku hung gave him goosebumps. Is that so? Fortunately, Wu Ma Wang didn't force the issue. Still, thanks to that suggestion, Yuan was able to figure out why Wu Ma Wang had helped him and why he was eating with him here. Is he thinking of me as his dongsang? At first, he thought it was simply because he owed him a debt. After all, he was the one who had saved Wu Ma Wang, who had been imprisoned in the heavenly realm and was about to be executed. But it seemed that Wu Ma Wang had been thinking of Yuan as a younger brother ever since then. Yeah, I was born after the war. Wu Ma Wang thought back to that time. The Goblin King took me in and made me live here. When I was young, I didn't know. I thought I was a goblin, and I didn't suspect a thing. But as my head grew bigger and my body grew bigger, I came to know. Wu Ma Wang's gaze turned back to the goblins laughing and chatting in the dining room. That I was different from them. It had been over 10,000 years. But that didn't mean it could be forgotten. This world was short on food. It was always night, so there was no warmth or light, and there was no food and the land was narrow. A world where day and night did not change. Among them, the world of night was the world where monsters and goblins lived. There was no way to point fingers and blame someone for the fight over food. It's true that they raised me. He didn't resent them. They had fought to live, and the goblins had survived, while the monsters had walked the path of destruction. And Wu Ma Wang, who had been a young monster. Was it necessary to kill even that lump of flesh? He had survived thanks to the Goblin King. Spare him, he seems like he'll be a good shaman. That was how Wu Ma Wang, who had been raised by the goblins, had been chosen by the tower to become a player and a ranker. After that, Wu Ma Wang returned to the land of goblins and asked them to build a tomb for the monsters. And in response to that request, try to defeat me, then I'll acknowledge you as the king of this country. Then you can do whatever you want. Try to defeat me, then I will acknowledge you as the king of this country. Then you can do whatever you want. Those guys who harassed me back then, like the guardian goblins and whatnot, they've climbed up to high positions. Some even became neighborhood bullies. The world sure has changed a lot. The Goblin King had set out a truly absurd condition. The Goblin King, the being at the apex of all goblins, who possessed a power that even high rankers viewed as insignificant. That Goblin King's proposal was truly absurd. However, I'll become the king, but keep your promise. Don't go back on your word when the time comes. Wu Ma Wang had not forgotten that proposal. I couldn't completely forget about it. As I lived alongside the goblins who killed my kin, I couldn't ignore even their graves. It was the result of hundreds of challenges. Wu Ma Wang spoke with a relieved face. Well, at any rate, this is the end for now. It was homework that had remained unsolved for over 10,000 years. It was only natural for his face to be bright with joy, having dealt with it today. But what brings you here? Is it because of Yi Jin? That's part of it. Part of it means there's something else. Yuan nodded his head. He had obtained Yi Jin. However, that was merely a skill that he had thought would be nice to have if possible, but not necessary. It wasn't something he absolutely had to obtain. I needed the help of skilled shamans. Several of them. Oh, if that's the case, I might be able to help you. Yes, that's why I came to you. If you call me Hung, I'll think about it. I'm quite expensive, you know. Yuan's eyebrows twitched. Did he really want to hear the word Hung that badly? It wasn't that difficult, but it felt like a nuisance for some reason. However, please, Hung, he was a monster who had lived for at least 10,000 years longer than himself. What was the harm in calling him Hung once if he didn't mean it? Yuan's words made Wu Ma Wang laugh out loud. It seemed like the word Hung made him quite happy. All right, I understand. I'll be satisfied with this much for now. Will you help me? Yes, but next time, I'd like those words to come from your heart. As if he was satisfied with this much for now, Wu Ma Wang raised his glass again. He had gained Wu Ma Wang's cooperation with the two words, Hung. It was an unexpected stroke of luck. Even in the fight against the Goblin King, Wu Ma Wang had shown himself to be superior to the Goblin King in both strength and shamanism. The more shamans, the better. As the meal was coming to an end. Why does this restaurant smell so bad? A group of goblins who had entered the restaurant began to hurl insults at Yuan and Wu Ma Wang. This restaurant's going to collapse. My nose is going to rot from the smell of humans and monsters. Don't you think so? That's right, I can't even drink here. Hey, let's go somewhere else, somewhere else. Ka, Pitui, they deliberately raised their voices and spat, causing a scene. As Yuan glared at them and tried to get up from his seat, Wu Ma Wang grabbed his hand. Do you think the Goblin King would have set such a condition for no reason? It was a meaningful statement. At Wu Ma Wang's dissuasion, Yuan sat back down and listened to the voices of the goblins going outside. What is His Majesty thinking? That little punk, didn't he say he'd work for me someday? The guardian goblins say that his skills are no joke. They're no joke. It's because His Majesty is old and sick. Their gossip was quite sophisticated. It seemed like they had done this once or twice before. As the goblins walked away, Wuma Wong opened his mouth as if he had expected it. It seems like I've gotten you involved for no reason. It seems like you hate monsters. I don't have only good memories. After they found out that I wasn't a goblin, many goblins suddenly changed their attitude. Discrimination against others exists everywhere. This place was no different. Did you beat them up? What, was I supposed to just take it? It seems like you didn't beat them up enough. I guess I forgot over time. 10,000 years was a long time. The goblins, like the rankers, grew stronger as time passed and their age increased, and that power was transformed into confidence. The goblins who had bullied Wuma Wong as a child and had gotten beaten up in return had gained confidence. Now they were wondering how they could get back at Wuma Wong. Back then, those damn guys became high-ranking officials, like guardian goblins and all that. They even became those neighborhood gangsters. The world sure has changed a lot. Guys who hate monsters would definitely oppose the construction of a graveyard for the monster race. As expected, you're different from Goku. If it had been Son Goku, it probably would have taken him a long time to notice something as simple as this. Feeling comfortable with the conversation, Wuma Wong let out a chuckle and said, "That's right, that's it, that's why the Goblin King also suggested such a bet to me. I thought he would never do such a thing. A promise is a promise." Wuma Wong enjoyed the gazes of the goblins that had gathered around him as if he found it amusing. "I guess I'll have some tiring work to do for a few days." Yu-Won let out a sigh at that response. He had been wrong to think that things would go smoothly. "Hung Nim, you should cancel the bet." Why would I do that? Didn't we get caught up in an unnecessary fight because of it?" Don't jump to conclusions. In any case, with this, the Goblin King is on my side. We might be able to get through this without any problems. I don't know. Yu-Won recalled the goblin that had just left with a look of contempt on its face. I don't think so. Instead of the collapsed castle, the Goblin King's new residence was the most luxurious tile-roofed house in the vicinity. The Goblin King was staying in the tile-roofed house under the moonlight, with a small table of alcohol spread out before him. And in front of such a Goblin King, reconsider. Bang! A goblin came looking for him and bowed its head to the Goblin King. How can you build a graveyard for monsters on this land? It's for the goblin ancestors who died fighting against monsters. Yangban. Yes. The goblin raised its head at the call. It wore a smiling mask of a nobleman on its head, but on the other hand, it had a very sullen expression on its face. One of the goblins who had been granted one of the 10 masks, including the nobleman, scholar, and servant masks. Yangban mask, Gwikik. The Goblin King's expression hardened at its appearance. Are you telling me to go back on my word? But this and that. A promise is a promise. Don't ruin the taste of the alcohol and get lost. The Goblin King waved his hand as if he was annoyed. Gwikik turned around weakly at the expulsion order that had already been repeated several times before. Thud, thud. The expression on the Yangban Mosque's face as it left the Goblin King's residence turned sinister. The Yangban Mosque's eyes, which suddenly turned around, became sharp like those of a mammal. What's going on? Calm down. A goblin that had also put a mask on its head, just like Gwikik. It was Baekhyun mask, Gwibek. I'm not here to fight. Why don't you calm down a little? If you're not here to fight, what business do you have appearing in front of me? I saw Wuma at the restaurant. Wuma Wong, what the hell is a king to a bastard like me? The Yangban mask held back its words at Baekhyun Mosque's comment. Wuma Wang's skills were considerable for him to be called a bastard. He had already surpassed the Goblin King in terms of his skills in sorcery a long time ago. So, what are you going to do about it? We can't let the monsters' graveyard be built on this land, can we? Right. Quote. This is the first time. What is? The two of us agreeing on something. Yangban and Baekhyun, the two of them had had completely opposite personalities since a long time ago. But for once, the two of them, who had always been at each other's throats, agreed. But the two of us alone aren't enough. I know. Baekhyun Mosque's eyes narrowed. A creepy and eerie gaze flashed. But what if it's not just the two of us? Chapter 394. After the Yangban mask left, a shadow moved in front of the Goblin King, who was quietly drinking alone with the moonlight as his side dish. Swish. A goblin rose from the shadow and knelt in front of the Goblin King. A goblin with a mask on its head that had eyes that smiled but no mouth. One of the 10 goblin masks, it was the Ame mask. Would you like a drink? The Goblin King poured alcohol into a fist-sized cup. A May mask silently reached out and took the cup to drink. Coo, is it good? No, it's bitter. My, what a goblin that doesn't know the taste of alcohol. The Goblin King let out a chuckle and poured more alcohol. After receiving a cup of alcohol out of courtesy, a May mask spoke. The Yangban and Baekjung met. Oh, it seems some of the masks turned their backs because of this incident. The morale of the goblins is the same. It seems they were quite shocked that I lost to that Uma guy. Isn't it true that you have grown quite old? What is this punk saying? So you should start drinking less. Why are there so many people ruining my alcohol today? The Goblin King drank without a care in the world. The king who had been in charge of the goblin realm for far too long. And the prestige of the king had been falling slowly and subtly. The Goblin King knew that the guardian goblins, including the Yangban and Baekjung, were waiting for something. Do you see it that way too? That I have grown old and weak? May I speak the truth? When have you ever spoken as if you weren't? Yes, you have grown quite old. Oh, the Goblin King frowned as if he didn't like what he heard and stopped his hand that was reaching for a cup of alcohol. HMPH, it seems it is time to start controlling myself. Swish, the Goblin King removed his hand and looked up at the moon. How many barrels of alcohol had he drunk with the excuse that he was drinking under the moonlight? It was to the point where it couldn't be counted by numbers or amounts. The Yangban mask and the Baekjung mask. 2 of the 10 masks had moved. The others will move as well. Are you worried? Worried? About what? The fight with the Uma King. You knew that if you lost that fight, they would move, did you not? Instead of answering a May mask's question, the Goblin King kicked the alcohol table away. Get rid of this. You've ruined my appetite. He avoided answering. It was neither a denial nor an affirmation. However, Lee Maidel thought the situation fit too well to be a coincidence. Lee Maidel eventually picked up the table the Goblin King had been eating on and went outside. He still hadn't received an answer to what he was curious about. The Goblin King was left alone without a table. He thought of the Yangban who had just visited him and questioned him. Please don't make a foolish choice. Wuma Wong and Kim Yu-won. These 2 strangers had entered the land of the goblins. If you don't want to fall behind, it was a good time to find out what was rotten. A few days later, rumors spread that a graveyard for monsters was being built. Did you hear? What? Over there, next to the graves of our ancestors, they're making a graveyard for monsters. Monsters? Why would they make a graveyard for monsters here? The king must have promised something. Really? Then we have to follow him. But isn't this going too far? Even if the king permitted it, they're making a graveyard for monsters that we were at war with. Yeah, how many of our ancestors died at their hands? But the king must have thought it through. That's right. After all, that fight was just about survival, wasn't it? Hey, Inma, are you done talking? The opinions of the goblins were divided. Some said they should follow the king's orders. Others said that even so, this was going too far. And among those divided groups, the ones who opposed the king's opinion were quite resolute. The graveyard of the Goblin Nation. A new space was being created in the graveyard of millions of goblins, located on a vast plain. Bang! An intruder appeared. That's Baekjungtal. A goblin with a Baekjungtal mask on his face. Of the 10 masks, Baekjungtal, known for his violent temper, kicked the goblins who were building the graveyard. What are you doing here? We are under the king's orders. You're building a graveyard for those filthy monsters. Thud. Baekjungtal approached the goblins, exuding murderous intent. Whether it's the king's orders or not, anyone who doesn't get out of here will die by my hand. But, 1. Swish. A long sword was drawn from Baekjungtal's waist. 2. A slowly continuing number. The goblins had no doubt that he would swing his sword at his own kind without hesitation the moment he counted to 3. If it were any other tall, it might be different, but Baekjungtal would do it and more. 3. Didn't you learn that at home? An unpleasant voice was thrown out. Baekjungtal's head turned. Yu-won, who had been standing a little further away, silently mourning at one of the goblins' graves, turned his body. In a place like this, you should be more polite than usual. Human, I've heard the rumors. There is a human who entered their country with the Demon King. It was a famous name that even goblins, who rarely cared about outside affairs, would have heard. So you're Kim Yu-won. A cold magical power erupted from the tip of Baekjungtal's sword. Yu-won saw someone overlapping with Baekjungtal. Is it Susanoo? The feeling and the atmosphere. Baekjungtal definitely felt similar to Susanoo, one of the 3 great demons. Of course, his skills seemed to be inferior to his. There are 10 guys like that. Yu-won didn't know much about goblins. However, it was certain that their potential was beyond imagination. You better be careful. The day before they started their assigned tasks, the Demon King called Wu-won and warned him. All the goblins with tall are skilled enough to be at least high rankers. Tall, 10 goblins with the power next to the Goblin King. They had such great authority and power that they could even refuse the Goblin King's orders once. Baekjungtul, who was now before his eyes, was also one of them. Can I kill them? Yes, but the goblins won't just sit still. The Goblin King's permission has been granted. That sly bastard, I think he intended to do this from the beginning. I think so too. The fact that he moved this quickly means that there must have been conflict among the goblins. It was a situation that Young didn't like. He wondered if perhaps the Goblin King hadn't lost to the Demon King in their fight, but had instead given up. That way, the other goblins who were dissatisfied with him would start to move, and he could also gain the Demon King's cooperation. Well, thanks to that. Skirt, sword against sword. I'll save my points. It wasn't bad. If I saved my points here, I could invest more points elsewhere. Points? Baekjungtul scoffed at Wu-won's mumbling. What good are points when your neck is cut off? It won't be cut off, so don't worry about it. You're just a rookie who just became a ranker, and you're acting cocky because you got one eye. Kim Wu-won, I've heard of the name. I heard a great rookie entered the tower. An amazing guy who's sweeping the rankings of all the players who came before him. But that was it. Baekjungtul wasn't very interested in the news the goblin who had gone outside the world had brought. It was the same for all goblins. Of course, because it wasn't something that had anything to do with them anyway. You're all the same, ignorant of the ways of the world. What? Baekjungtul frowned as if to ask what that meant. But Wu-won didn't feel like engaging in a useless war of words with him anymore. There was no point in continuing here, as it would only end up being a waste of his time. Instead, I guess you're confident in your sword. Clank. Wu-won lifted the tip of his sword and approached Baekjungtul. Let's see it. Swordsmanship. This punk. With your generic lines. Swish. Wu-won's profile as he passed by. And your lousy skills. Baekjungtul, who had been wielding his sword, stopped. Somehow, Wu-won's sword had grazed the nape of his neck. Gulp. Blood flowed from his nape. Your swordsmanship is too good. Thud. Baekjungtul grabbed his bleeding neck with one hand and turned his head to meet Wu-won's eyes. Both of Wu-won's eyes had turned gold. A different kind of eye from the golden eyes of truth. It was the first prediction eye he had used in actual combat. But unfortunately, if it continued like before, just the golden eyes of truth would be enough. Try a little harder this time. The Goblin King's quarters. Hundreds of goblins, including Yangbantal, gathered in front of it. Yangbantal, Jujital, Gokshidal. There are 3 top-class goblins. Is this for real? It was impossible not to feel nervous. The Goblin King, who hadn't changed for a long time. This was the only time when the justification and power to drive him out were gathered. The king probably hasn't recovered yet. Just a few days ago. The Goblin King was defeated in a fight with the Horse King and went into seclusion to recuperate. He hadn't shown his face since then, so the goblins thought that the king was badly injured. The one to watch out for now is Amadal. I know how good he is. What a monster. Amadal. He was the most skilled goblin among the 10 talls. He was the last to receive a tall, but his skills were so great that there was speculation among the goblins that he might not actually be a player. It was only natural to be the most wary. Master, Yangban, Amadal will be taken care of by the 2 of you. Then you're going to take care of the king by yourself. Are those guys you brought just for show? There are 5 guardian goblins attached to this side. And the Baekjungtul will join us soon. Creak. That's when it happened. The gate of the tile-roofed house where the Goblin King was staying began to open. The goblins, who had been tense, thought that the huge Goblin King would walk out through that door. However, thud, 1, 2, 3, 3. It wasn't the Goblin King who walked out the door. A man who was over 2 meters tall, though not as tall as the Goblin King. It was the Horse King. There aren't as many as I thought. I won't do it myself for this much. TCH. What? Isn't that a monster? Uma, the Horse King, who had defeated the Goblin King, appeared here with a healthy body. The 3 talls leading the goblins sensed that something was wrong. Clearly, the Goblin King and the Horse King should have been hostile to each other. I will now inform you of the king's judgment on you. Crash. The Horse King clapped his hands together. And at that moment, rumble, ack, my body. Arg, thud, thud. Hundreds of goblins collapsed to the floor, unable to withstand the pressure on their bodies, and screamed as the bones all over their bodies broke. There was no special preparation. The Horse King used his magic to control the space around him simply by clapping his hands. The judgment is, so that no one could escape. Death. Chapter 395. That hung, he's really scary when he fights. Thinking about the Bull Demon King, Sun Ogong's body shivered. My god, there's something that Sun Ogong is scared of. Curious, Yu Wan, for once, decided not to interrupt Sun Ogong's chattering. It's not anything else that's scary. He's strong, yes, but it's his personality changing all of a sudden that's the scariest. His personality, yeah, normally, he can't even bring himself to kill a bug, saying things like, every life has a reason for being born. He acts all kind and stuff, but as soon as a fight starts, he's a different person. Sun Ogong, who always only had good things to say about the Bull Demon King, especially praised him when it came to fighting. He was a real madman, that hung. Huff. Gulp. 3 masks surrounded one person, coughing up blood and breathing heavily. The other goblins who had come with them were already dead or collapsed, unconscious. It hadn't even been a few minutes since the fight started. But what the hell, what was this feeling of pressure and fear? Goo. Until the fight started, he had seemed like a harmless guy. So harmless that the term, gentleman, seemed to have been made for the Bull Demon King. But the moment the fight started, the Bull Demon King's aura completely changed. Gulp. The Gaxi Mask, looking at the Bull Demon King, gulped. The title the Bull Demon King was known by outside the realm of the goblins came to his mind. The Ox Strength King. Until Heracles appeared, the Bull Demon King was known to be unrivaled in strength. Damn an. Thud. But no matter how strong, it was embarrassing to be scared by a mere goblin. Squish. The moment the Bull Demon King took a step, the ground caved in, and the 3 goblins' bodies shook. They were scared. The undeniable fact hurt the 3 masks' pride. Let's go at him all at once. Good. When I give the signal. The 3 tried to coordinate. Foosh. At that moment, a wind blew past their cheeks. Blow. Screech. A green leaf fan was created in the Bull Demon King's hand. Banana leaf fan. Bang. A huge gust of wind swept through the 3 goblins' bodies. Hundreds of millions of blades sliced their bodies, and the air pressure crushed them. They raised their arms to protect their necks and swung their swords to barely block the wind, but it wasn't enough. Kya. The goblins were caught in the storm. Thump. In the midst of the noisy wind, footsteps could be heard. Swish. A hand gripped their necks tightly. Cough. Boom. Their bodies rose into the air, defying gravity. It was a strong evil force that they couldn't even resist. The Gaxi Mask looked at the face that had come close through the storm and was terrified. It was like a giant bull charging at them. Even without the hand gripping his neck, his entire body felt like it would crumble under Umo's aura. This is actually quite funny. Kwa. See crazy. His eyeballs seemed as if they would pop out. The mask he wore on his face cracked and broke under the pressure of Umo's aura. Umo's hand tightened around the Gaxi Tal's neck. It's because your things were scared and ran away from here. Kwaduduk. The neck bent in a grotesque direction in his hand. Umo threw the dead Gaxi Tal in his hand to the side with one hand, and turned his head to the other 2 masks. You've become this weak. Around the same time. JJEONG. KWAU. The Baekjung Tal, who had blocked Yuan's sword, flew backwards. Sparks flew and a long sword mark was drawn on the floor, centered around the point where their swords had clashed. The Baekjung Tal, who had received the sword in an unstable position, staggered and barely regained his balance. Huff. Deal. Deol. The Baekjung Tal felt like he was going to die. His breath was stuck in his throat and his hands were shaking. His eyes felt like they were going to dry up and shrivel, as he hadn't blinked once this entire time. He had only swung his sword for about 15 minutes. Nevertheless, the Baekjung Tal felt more exhausted than ever before. If I let my guard down for even a second, it's over. It was hard for him to even stand still like this. Of course, even if he were to stand still, he had to focus all his attention on the sword that could fly at any moment, so he couldn't help but lose stamina. I understand now. What on earth did he understand? Swish. Yuan swung his sword in the air and looked at the tip of the sword with both eyes. His eyes were still shining golden. Looking at it for more than a second is just a waste of concentration. He seemed to be lost in deep thought. The Baekjung Tal's eyes, which had been cornered to the edge of a cliff, sparkled. This is my only chance. He had learned through numerous battles. If he missed this opportunity now, he would never be able to win this fight. PAHT. The Baekjung Tao's presence disappeared, and at the same time, his new form circled behind Yuan. In the blink of an eye, the Baekjung Tal, with a sharp red aura wrapped around his sword, swung his sword at Yuan's neck from behind. But that moment, that's it, SOOK. Yuan's golden eyes entered the Baekjung Tal's eyes. If you can do it, right? SWAAHK. The Baekjung Tal's movements as he swung his sword stopped. A vertical red line appeared on his body. At the last moment, Yuan's words lingered in his head. So until now, Ji-eek. His body began to split in two. You've been playing around. Kuwa-ahk. The Baekjung Tal's body was cut and sprayed blood. Thud, tuduk. Thud, thump. The fragrant smell of grass filled his nose pleasantly. Just a few days ago, the Goblin King, who had been downing bottles instead of cups, had suddenly started drinking tea instead of alcohol. The body of the stripped Baekjungtal fell to the floor. Wu Won flicked the blood off his sword onto the floor and put the sword back in its sheath at his waist. Phew, he felt sweat running down his forehead and his eyes becoming heavy. It was the side effect of using the Eye of Prophecy. It's harder than I thought. Baekjungtal had been an easy opponent. He was a skilled fighter, ranked around 100th, but Wu Won had become strong enough to win even against Satan. Even if it wasn't just one, but 2 or 3 Baekjungtals, it wouldn't have been difficult. And yet, I'd rather not use it right now. That's how it was after the battle ended. The Eye of Prophecy proficiency has increased by 0.12%. It was a very small amount, but his proficiency had increased. Swish. Wu Won's pupils returned to their original state. He blinked his blackened pupils a few times, and his blurred vision returned. It's my first time using it, and it's only 0.12%. It was even more difficult than he had thought. Wu Won stood there for a moment, reviewing his fight with Baekjungtal. The trajectory of Baekjungtal's sword as he imagined it in his head repeated itself several times. What are you doing? He just keeps standing there. Hey, isn't this a big deal? Baekjungtal is dead. Wu Won came to his senses at the murmurs directed at him. Right, he could review it later. For now, it was time to get the annoying stuff out of the way first. Wu Won turned around and headed back to the Goblin City. With this, he had stopped the guy who had been running wild in the graveyard. Now all that was left was the Ogre King. Is it over on that side? It was a short time, less than half a day. The short rebellion, raised by the 4 escaped prisoners, passed without causing any change in the Goblin Nation. Wu Won headed straight to the Goblin King's quarters. The Ogre King was having a private conversation with the Goblin King. You're here, a light greeting. Wu Won felt like he had just gone for a walk. Likewise, the Ogre King looked very calm, even though he must have killed quite a few goblins. Was there no problem? No, the goblins came. It's all settled now. Is that so? So that really was the face of someone who had killed hundreds of goblins. Suddenly, Sun Ogong's words came to mind. He really was crazy, that hung. So that's what he meant. Only now did Wu Won think he understood what those words meant, and he nodded his head. Why are you like that? It's nothing. You two seem pretty close. Pour. The Goblin King poured some alcohol into a large cup in front of the Ogre King. No, the cup was a cup, but what was poured into it was not alcohol. Tea. The fragrant herb smell pleasantly filled his sense of smell. Just a few days ago, the Dakebai King, who drank whole bottles of alcohol instead of cups, suddenly started to drink tea. We're pretty close. He's my younger brother. As if in agreement, the Dokubi King looked at Yu Won. Yu Won folded his hands. Not yet. Who's right? King Uma laughed. It was a reaction that said, whatever. At the laughing King Uma, the Dokubi King clicked his tongue and looked at him. You still like making a family even at your age. King Uma had been looking for a family for a long time. Not the Dokubi King who raised him, or the Dokubis who rejected him because he was of a different race. His own true family. Come and sit down. I've prepared some tea. I'll drink well. Slurp slurp. Yu Won sat down, and King Uma poured him some well-brewed tea. Yu Won took a sip of the tea and looked at King Uma and the Dokubi King in turn. I feel like I'm in Jotunheim. Then to me, this place seems like Alfheim. Haha, I guess the youngest is short. Don't call me the youngest. That makes me sound like that guy Sun Wukong's younger brother. Was that a problem? They chatted for a while. King Uma was the one who mostly talked. Most of it was about Sun Wukong. Yu Won listened to Sun Wukong's past, and the Dokubi King kept frowning at the bland taste of the tea. Then, I heard that Dokubis are very good at calculating. Yu-won spoke to the Dokubi king as he refilled his empty teacup. Isn't that right? Yes. The answer came right away. A merchant must be good at calculating. It didn't seem false. No matter how much Dokubis were blinded by points, they were never scammers. If they owed a debt, they would pay it back, and if there was a debt to be collected, they would collect it. That was the rule of the Dokubis. Then you'll add this debt to the next one. Come to think of it, you said you had 2 requests. He had already received one of the 2 requests, Yi Jin. Now only one was left. I'll reward this guy separately later. And you? I'm fine, so take care of this guy a little better. Oh, then the calculation will change again. The Dokubi king, who had been thinking for a while, seemed to have made up his mind and nodded. If he added the debt he owed King Uma, there would be little he couldn't do. All right, what's your request? Just tell me, we'll grant you anything we can grant. The Dokubi king planned to grant any request that was reasonable. Of course, if it was too difficult, he would have to charge a little extra. But then, physical enhancement potion. At Yuan's words, the Dokubi king almost dropped the cup in his hand. I heard that you can make it here. Chapter 396. For a moment, silence fell. The Demon King looked at Wuma Wong as if to ask what that was. A body modification potion. Even Wuma Wong, who had lived longer than most of the high rankers, had never heard of it before. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? Yes, it does. I heard it from the outside. It's difficult to tell you the source. TCH, a secretive little brat. The Goblin King glanced at Wuma Wong and asked with his eyes. Is this guy really like this? It's better not to ask too much. Wuma Wong knew that Yuan had come from the future riding on the clockwork, so he thought it was the same with this matter. It was common for information that was not known at the moment to become known to many people as time passed. The Goblin King twitched one of his eyebrows and looked at Yuan. Yuan asked as if he was lost in thought. I heard that goblins will do anything if you give them enough points. Isn't that right? That is true, but then please do it. You know one thing but not the other. It's not something you can just make because you want to. You have to find many different ingredients that are difficult to obtain from all over the tower. Thud. Yuan took something out of his inventory and threw it on the floor. It was a round, bead-shaped jewel. The Lich King's life vessel. Thud, thud. The Night King's bone fragment. Fenrir's heart. Dragon's horn. One by one, the ingredients popped out of the inventory. The Goblin King watched the ingredients with a dumbfounded expression. The amount of items that came out was so great that the volume of the ingredients that Yuan took out filled more than half of the large room. What do you want to do with all this? Everything in sight was an ingredient for the body modification potion that Yuan had mentioned. From the bodies of boss-level monsters scattered throughout the tower and rare elixirs hidden somewhere, to magical items like the Lich's life vessel. No, rather, it was so much better than the existing ingredients. The problem was not how he knew the ingredients for the potion. Even if he knew the ingredients for the potion, getting them all was a separate issue. To think that he had already prepared ingredients that were difficult to obtain. I collected them here and there. I've been collecting them little by little. If you have enough points, creating a physical remodeling potion is also a method. It was when the story about the goblins came up. A colleague who had been quiet throughout the meeting raised his hand and spoke. It's a bit annoying to collect the ingredients, though. A physical remodeling potion, what's that? It was a story that everyone was hearing for the first time. However, the ranker who spoke and his ranking were not ordinary, so they couldn't just ignore it. It was during that meeting that they found out that he was from the Goblin country. The ingredients are a bit difficult. If you want to collect all of that, you'll have to go up from the first floor while paying attention to the ingredients. Most of them can be obtained from the higher floors. It's probably better to get the dragon's horn from the original dragon if possible. It'll take a lot of time. It should be worth getting something that's worth going through all that trouble for. Opinions were divided. As a result, the colleagues came to one conclusion. If you don't have enough magic power, go to the Dragon Clan and get the Dragon King's body. If you don't have anything else, go to the Goblin Clan. The discussion ended like that. Of course, it was an unrealistic story. Actually, even if you don't have enough magic power, is there anyone who can't support it with their body? Right, that would be a complete waste. A waste? What's a waste? A wasted character. What's a character? Ordinary players tended to lack magic power. Above all, physical strengthening was done naturally as the level increased, and the training method through training was quite well known. However, magic power was not like that. Even Yuan and Sun Ogong, who were overflowing with talent for magic power right now, didn't have overflowing magic power. Although there were cases where the physical strength stat did not follow strength or the reflex nerve stat did not follow agility, it was rare for the body to not be able to withstand the overflowing magic power. I didn't know it would turn out like this. It was something that I had memorized just in case. In the end, the one that was much more lacking was this body that couldn't support the magic power. Swoosh. Yu-Won looked up and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Above the Goblin King's head, there was one guy hiding without revealing himself. He said he owed me, but he was here. A high ranker who suddenly appeared at the tower. I wondered where he had come from, but it seemed that he had really been tied up in the Goblin country. For a moment, he wondered about his old colleague. How is it? Wu-Won asked the Goblin King, who was momentarily speechless again due to his absurdity. Can you make it with this? Thanks to the Goblin King's consideration, Wu-Won was guided to a spare room. Inside a spacious tile-roofed house, Wu-Won was assigned a room large enough for 4 or 5 people to use together, and he unpacked his belongings and washed his body. He warmed his body, which was covered in dust from the fight with Baekjungtul, and lay down on the bedding. Among the days that had passed without anything to do, today was a day with quite a lot of income. Wu-Won closed his eyes. Then, before he came here, the fight with Baekjungtul came to mind. Chong, the swords clashed. Even though he knew, he clashed on purpose. I predict the direction in which the sword will swing and clash. Single quote. Wu-Won deliberately swung his sword along with Baekjungtal's sword. It was practice for using the Eye of Prophecy. Swoosh. Baekjungtal's sword appeared in Wu-Won's eyes. It wasn't at the level of seeing the trajectory of the sword swinging. Literally, Wu-Won saw where Baekjungtul was swinging his sword. One of countless trajectories. Baekjungtal's real sword, that is. It's safer than fighting that relies on senses, including sight. Single quote. He won the fight against Baekjungtul. However, it was not a satisfactory fight. That much was enough with just sensory field. A skill that maximizes senses and reads all the signs in a certain space. Sensory field was a skill with a similar effect to Wan Jiamzhang, but it had an effect that surpassed Wan Jiamzhang in that it increased reflexes. In the fight against Baekjungtul, reading his movements was enough with sensory field and Wan Jiamzhang, as he always did. Going too far, it was a waste of magic power because the investment was too much. More than anything else, dimly, Wu-Won pressed his eyes tightly shut due to the fatigue that still lingered. Proficiency is a problem, but the bigger problem is my body. He had enough magic power. Thanks to Danpeng, Wu-Won had eaten several outers as predators, and thanks to that, he had acquired dozens of magic power stats that he had not planned for. Except for anything else, he was as good as Odin or Son Goku in terms of magic power stats. The problem lay elsewhere. Apart from magic power, I have more points than you or Odin. You may have to make up for it with your physical abilities because you don't have enough points, but he doesn't have to. The problem was elsewhere. I have more points than you or Odin if you only consider the points I have. You could say that magic power is something that is given by the heavens. It was a battle where I just wasted my stamina. It was clear what was lacking. Proficiency could be increased over time. Opportunities and enlightenment were important, but the surest way to increase proficiency was to use the skill consistently. Then there was only one thing left. A physical transformation potion. It was the only way to increase stats other than magic power. The fragrant smell of tea. Amato looked at the Goblin King lifting a large glass. What are you thinking? I didn't know you were someone who didn't go well with tea. Is that right? Yes. If I get hit by that fist, I'm not going to just end up with a bump on my head. Amato waved his hand. He knew the Goblin King's strength well. If he got hit by that fist, his head would probably fly off. The Goblin King raised his glass again. The glass was a wine glass, but it contained tea. He still couldn't give up alcohol completely, and he couldn't stand it without drinking something. Amato opened his mouth as he watched the awkward sight. It seems like your first defeat was quite shocking. Bang! The glass hit the table. The glass was so heavy that it made a loud noise. I started drinking when I was 17. The Goblin King, who spoke dramatically like a movie line, poured more tea into the glass and continued. I have a lot of alcohol in my body. It's going to take some time to get it out. That's a good idea. Age is nothing. It must be nice for you not to age. The Goblin King chuckled for a moment, gulped down the tea like alcohol, and asked. Kim Yuan, that guy wants a physical transformation potion. I heard that too. You took it too, didn't you? Amato nodded. A silence of affirmation. The Goblin King muttered with a grin. That guy, where did he hear about something like that? Are you going to give it to him? He has enough points. He seems really rich. You seem really rich. If we're just talking about points, you have more than Odin or me. Well, you're using your body to make up for your lack of points, but that punk doesn't have to do that. 150 million points. It was an amount of money that ordinary rankers couldn't even dream of. It was a world of difference from the points that Lee Myedel had when he first entered the Goblin country. But that punk, what about him? He seemed to recognize me. Really, it shouldn't have been possible, based on the timeline. It hadn't even been a few years since Yuan had entered the tower. On the other hand, Lee Myedel had never left the Goblin country for thousands of years. The two of them had never met. Originally, Yuan shouldn't have even known about Lee Myedel's existence. But how? I don't know. After thinking for a moment, the Goblin King scratched his complicated head and picked up his teacup again. There was no point in thinking about it. It was a waste of time. Right now, he needed to quickly resolve the issue right in front of him. Leave the tomb construction to the Icewing Kobold, and you come see me tomorrow. Do you plan on starting right away? We have to get our hands and feet in order for a day. If the magic goes wrong, it'll be a big problem. Just the two of us. Let's get rid of the mediocre ones. You, me, and the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven should be enough. Lee Myedel nodded his head. Of course. With the tower's best warlock, the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, the creator of that magic, the Goblin King, and Lee Myedel himself, there was no room for any other goblins to intervene. I'm going to be tired for a while. The task of using magic to melt down the ingredients and make them into a potion would take more than a day or two. Furthermore, it was also quite difficult to melt the potion inside the user's body, so Lee Myedel already felt fatigued at the thought of doing that annoying task. But, strangely enough, the Goblin King seemed to be expecting something instead. You'll be tired, but it'll probably be quite fun. What do you mean fun? I couldn't check everything properly earlier because there was so much of it. The countless medicinal ingredients that Yuan had taken out. After checking them, the Goblin King felt like he was sobering up for the first time in a long time. It seems like there were quite a few usable ingredients mixed in. It was because he thought something amazing would come out of it. Chapter 397. His sleep was short. A few hours later, someone knocked on Yuan's door. Wuma Wang stood outside the door. Wuma Wang beckoned Yuan, who had just woken up, to come out. He seemed to know what was going on. Before going to bed, Yuan had asked Wuma Wang for a favor. He didn't know it would be this fast. Click. Yuan followed Wuma Wang outside. Wuma Wang stopped at the backyard of a nearby tiled house. Will this do? Didn't you say you were going to train your eyes anyway? Thud. Wuma Wang released his finger. He didn't take out the Honchulgan. Regardless, Wuma Wang's hand was filled with great strength, and Yuan's pupils turned golden. Well, yes, let's get started. Yes. As he answered, Yuan's eyelids closed. In an instant, his vision closed and a pitch-black darkness enveloped him. His senses were closed. He blocked his vision and suppressed his nerves, which were always on high alert, to the bottom. It had been a long time since he had felt this way. Even when he closed his eyes to sleep, he always felt like he could see everything around him. Yuan's senses were so developed that he could detect every mouse and bug around him. But when he deliberately blocked it out, he felt like he was floating in space. Now all that was left was one thing. Screech. Inside his closed eyelids, Yuan's pupils glowed. The golden pupils glowed, and a red aura covered them. Eye of Prophecy, predicts the future. Fire Eye and Golden Gaze, sees through falsehoods. Right after the skills were activated. Swoosh. Numerous scenes floated above Yuan's pupils. Wuma Wang threw a punch. First at his neck, then at his chest and forehead. Yuan identified the real one and stretched out his hand. Bam! His palm blocked Wuma Wang's fist. It wouldn't have been easy if it was a punch with all his might, but this wasn't a fight of strength in the first place. With his eyes closed, blocking all senses, he blocked Wuma Wang's fist by relying on the power of the Eye of Prophecy. Bam! Thud! Bam! The speed got faster and faster. The force got stronger and stronger. It took time to discern the real one among the futures that passed before his eyes. Chest, forehead, which one? He couldn't tell the difference between the two. He had no choice but to guess. Thwack. Ah! A fist to the forehead. Yuan's eyes opened wide. He almost threw up, but he barely held it in. Creak. His legs gave out and his body shook. Thanks to the fact that he barely held on, he managed to avoid falling to the floor. It's harder than I thought. Was it because the punch came in too fast? Wuma Wang clicked his tongue. And Yuan's pride was shaken by Wuma Wang's reaction. I'll do it again. Yuan took a deep breath and closed his eyes again. He killed his senses and relied only on the eye of prophecy. Tens of thousands of futures unfolded before him, and he found the real one among them. Okay. Wuma Wang raised his fist. He thought he should do as he wished since he said so much. That day, Yuan was beaten up by Wuma Wang until he passed out. 3 days passed. Since the sun didn't rise or set, it was hard to tell how the days were passing. The only way to know that the days were passing was to check the kit once in a while. Thud, bam, bang, Wuma Wang's fist was blocked by Yuan's hand, and the other fist hit the empty space on the right. Even though the speed was quite fast, Yuan blocked the fist well and avoided it. His movements, which had been unnatural at first, were now quite natural. Bang, again, his fist hit the empty space. The process of Wuma Wang throwing a punch and Yuan dodging it was as smooth as water flowing. I react before the fist is thrown. All of his movements were predicted. It was something that could not happen unless there was a considerable difference in skill. However, Wu Yun was able to do it. I guess I've gotten used to it. The Horse King continued to look at Wu Yun's closed eyes. It had been over 2 days since those eyes had not opened. What would happen if he opened his eyes properly and his senses, which had been forcibly killed, returned to normal? Of course, before that. Thwack, quote exclamation mark quote, the Horse King's fist struck Wu Yun's stomach. I guess I have to solve another problem first. Thud. His knees buckled. Wu Yun, who had collapsed to the floor, hurriedly got up again. His whole body was drenched in sweat, and his legs were trembling, but getting up was a kind of instinct. That's enough. Wu Yun's eyelids peeled open. The irises that revealed their color shone with a brighter golden color than before. Perhaps those eyes already knew what he was about to say. Now that you can see, I wonder what to do with that weak body. Swish. Wu Yun's pupils returned to normal. Wu Yun was not very surprised by the Horse King's remark, as it was a problem he already knew well. Is that so? The Horse King nodded. Even though it was not a skill that he used directly, he had noticed the burden that the Eye of Prophecy brought, as he had been watching the skill from the side for several days. Furthermore, your eyes are your eyes, but you can't stand a punch like this. The Horse King clicked his tongue as if he were disappointed. It was a little unfair. His younger brother, Sun Ogong, and the Horse King, both of them had physical abilities that were among the best in the tower. In particular, the current Horse King was not lacking in terms of strength alone, so much so that it was enough to say that he was the best in the tower. It was a great thing that his body did not crumble even after receiving a punch from such a Horse King. However, he's not wrong. For the past few days, Wu Yun had relied solely on the Eye of Prophecy. He had not used his mana to strengthen his body, nor had he used gigantification. Of course, the same went for the Horse King. And when they clashed with strength and strength, the result was overwhelming. That's why I need it. Are you talking about that medicine? Yes, unlike Ogong, you're a smart guy, so you'll do well. The Horse King, who had hesitated for a moment, opened his mouth with a worried expression. It looks like it's going to be quite painful. Whoosh. The Horse King turned his body. The training for the past few days had started without any proper rest. The remaining schedule was too tight to continue. Take a day or so to rest. Then you'll be able to endure it. A day, perhaps that would be the time left until the medicine was ready. Wu Yun nodded and lay down on the floor. His body did not have the strength to walk to his room. He lay on the floor like that for a day. Gurgle, gurgle. Wu Yun looked at the huge boiling pot in front of him. He had come to see if the medicine was all made, but instead of medicine, there was a large public bath that was bubbling like lava. Is this it? What, did you think I'd just let you eat it easily? Of course. Wu Yun stopped talking. It was a natural question. Of the elixirs that ordinary people spoke of, medicine was usually contained in a small flask. However, the medicine that was boiling before his eyes was so large that he could even swim in it, so the difference was enormous. Are there only 1 or 2 ingredients? It's fortunate that this much came out. Originally, it should have been much more. It was true, the ingredients that Wu Yun had brought filled a large room. It was understandable that the processed medicine would produce such a large amount of liquid. But still, I didn't know that it would be a broth, not a medicine. He had not thought that such a large amount would come out unless all the ingredients were put in and boiled. How do I drink all of that? I'll die from overeating. Even if he drank it sip by sip, it seemed like it would take at least 10 days to finish it all. It's not meant to be eaten. It's meant to be absorbed. Absorbed, you'll know once you're in it. There are 2 things you need to keep in mind. The Goblin King said as he folded his 2 fingers one by one. Keep your mind straight, and don't spare the points. The Goblin King nodded at the potion as he said that. It meant to go in quickly. Yuan looked at Wang and Amadal around the potion. The 3 best shamans had gathered. He didn't have to worry about anything other than shamanism. Gulping, Yuan walked straight towards the potion. As he got closer, a disgusting smell reached his nose as if it were a lie. It was black water without any impurities floating. Swoosh, he first put 1 foot in. He didn't feel anything, so he jumped right into the potion. Splash, the potion was deeper than he thought. It seemed to be at least 4 meters deep. Strangely enough, he could still breathe in the water, but as he entered the black water, he felt as if he was floating through space. This feels weird. At first, he didn't feel anything. He thought it would be hot because it was boiling, but it wasn't. He just felt like he was floating in lukewarm water. Yuan lifted his head and looked up. Wang and Amadal, and the Goblin King. The 3 of them were holding their palms against the water. Let's begin. Yuan nodded. He was confident in enduring the pain. He also had enough points. Now it was the beginning. Wung. Sizzle. The shamanism of the 3 people was transmitted through the potion surrounding Yuan and through his skin. At the same time, the boiling shamanic medicine began to seep into Yuan's body. Crackle. Quote exclamation mark quote. Yuan's eyes widened. The shamanic medicine that began to seep into his body twisted the muscles of his entire body. His body strongly rejected the shamanic medicine, and the vast amount of shamanic medicine that began to be forcibly injected by shamanism forcibly twisted Yuan's flesh. It was the beginning of body remodeling. Starting, body strengthening shamanism. Dragon's horn imbued with magic power seeps into the body. Penalty applied. Body strengthening shamanism is interrupted. You can proceed with body strengthening shamanism using points. Would you like to use points? 1,012,190 points are required. 1 million points from the start. He thought he knew why he was told not to spare the points. The pain that beat his body, the flesh that rejected the shamanic medicine, and even the penalty. Yuan realized the true nature of this shamanism. Points are ultimately the power to beat the system and laws of the tower. Making the impossible possible, creating something out of nothing. It all comes from points. The body-strengthening potion that Yuan was in was made by forcibly creating a monster's body or special ingredients into the form of an elixir. Since it was something that could not be made into an elixir in the first place, there was no way his body could accept it. However, points are the power to overcome the system and laws. In order to continue this shamanism, an appropriate price was needed to go against the law. 1 million from the start. Points in possession, 141,478,900 p. He still had plenty of points left. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he had earned points for this day, so the choice was obvious. Don't use it. 1,012,190 points are consumed. Restarting. Body strengthening shamanism. Crackle. Stab. His muscles tore like paper and twisted. The screams that leaked out of the cracks were devoured by the shamanic medicine. How much time passed since the shamanism began? Magic power increases slightly. Absorbing the characteristics of dragon's horn imbued with magic power. Physical strength increases. Physical strength has increased by 1. One of the ingredients Yuan had prepared had all seeped into his body. The joy was short-lived. Yuan felt a sense of despair for the first time in a long time at the message that followed. Starting, body strengthening shamanism. Heart of Fenrir, the Wolf King, seeps into the body. This was just the beginning. Chapter 398. Boggle. The potion that Eugene had entered bubbled more and more. Li Myung looked at the terrible smell that seemed to gather all the stench in the world and frowned. Then he suddenly looked at King Uma and King Goblin, who were continuing to inject the potion into Eugene's body. Has it been a day? A day had passed since the potion started. Of course, it wasn't that long. However, Li Myung, who was in charge of the potion, felt his mental strength and magical power gradually reaching their limits. Take a break if you're tired, King Uma said, noticing Li Myung's condition. Li Myung, who was about to say that he was okay, nodded. He realized that if he stubbornly insisted on staying here, he would only be a hindrance. Thud, Li Myung sat down on the spot and began to breathe calmly. King Uma, who had told him to rest, began to concentrate on the potion again. King Goblin yawned, looking bored. Amazing. This was definitely not an ordinary task. Each of the ingredients that melted in the bubbling liquid were materials obtained from monsters or divine beasts that even high rankers had difficulty catching. To forcibly melt the power contained in such materials required a lot of points, but it also required outside help. If the potion was mixed incorrectly or if another potion was started while the potion was in progress, there was no telling what side effects there would be. Of course. Boggle. Lee Myung's gaze turned to Eugene, who was in the boiling potion. This guy, who is enduring this kind of potion, is the same. Lee Myung had already experienced a similar potion a long time ago. At that time, the shaman who had helped Lee Myung was King Goblin. However, the physical strengthening potion at that time was not as large scale as it was now. The only reason he had been able to obtain this amount of ingredients was because of Eugene's abilities, and because of that, the burden of the potion was several times greater than what Lee Myung had experienced. I hope he can endure it. If the person receiving the potion lost consciousness, this potion would no longer be meaningful. No matter how hard the outside shamans tried, if the recipient couldn't accept it, it was over. Hang in there. Absorbing the trait of the ancient king of knights. Strength increases by 1. Strength increased by 1. As his mental state became increasingly unstable, a message appeared. Fortunately, there was a reward. If not for this, he might have given up a while ago. I'm going to die, seriously. Gulp. He had no problems breathing. The reason his breath was caught in his throat now was due to the effects of the elixir flowing into his body. The characteristics of the various ingredients mixed into the elixir were being injected into his body. As a result, he was gaining a lot of stats, but his mental and physical strength were gradually reaching their limits. If he hadn't been able to gain physical strength as stats every once in a while, his body would have collapsed and he would have lost consciousness. This must be about the 20th time. If so, how many were left? He hadn't kept track of the numbers, so he didn't have a good sense of it. Yu-Won began to count the ingredients he had collected in his head. But then, Sirt's heart is absorbed into your body. Penalty applied. Physical enhancement elixir is paused. You can continue physical enhancement elixir by using points. Do you wish to use points? 51,248,900 points are required. Gasp. He felt a searing pain as if his flesh and muscles were being burned. Yu-Won's eyes widened. It's here. It was the ingredient he had thought about most when planning his physical enhancement elixir. Sirt's heart. He had to focus with all his might. If he failed this, it would be as good as losing half of his elixir. 51,248,900 points consumed. Physical enhancement elixir restarts. 50 million points disappeared in an instant. But Sirt's heart was an item worth that much. Even in the tutorial alone, Yu-Won had gained a huge amount of stats through Surtur's heart. This is the expanded version of that. Surt was one of Surtur's many children. He was just one of the sons of Muspelheim. But Surt was different. If Surtur was one of the many branches of a giant tree, Surt was the trunk and the root. The heart of the guy had a completely different level of power than the giant's heart that Yu-Won had consumed in the tutorial. Crackle. Quote exclamation mark quote. It was as if his entire body was burning. Boom. Yu-Won's pupils turned red. Wan Jiamjung resists flames of the giant and demon at their peak. Holy fire resists flames of the giant and demon at their peak. Sacred fire resists hellfire of the pinnacle giant and fiend. Sacred fire. Somehow, I tried to resist the pain of my body burning up, but I couldn't resist it perfectly. The potion made from Surtur's melted heart seeped into Yu-Won's body, guided by the spell. It was Yu-Won's job to endure and accept that flame. The pain that I had just gotten used to got worse again. Yu-Won twisted his body in pain as if it was burning up. I must win, no matter what. A purple sky. Robin walked while stepping on the black fallen leaves on the ground. Rustle. The trees and the ground. Everything was a black forest. It's always annoying whenever I come here, Robin muttered while looking at the forest he had visited in a long time. Dumbfounded Chaos walked towards the forest while stepping on the dead fallen leaves. The black forest felt as if it was pulling him in as he got closer. Half-demons would most likely get eaten by the forest the moment they stepped foot in it. Bah, like them, right over there. Thud. A small black goat blinked its eyes from the black bushes. It looked like it was still a baby, but it was drooling while looking at him. It was laughable. Come here. Dumbfounded Chaos beckoned the goat. Rustle. The goat approached Dumbfounded Chaos while moving through the bushes. The small goat was about the height of his waist. It came close to Dumbfounded Chaos and suddenly opened its large mouth. Snap. And that moment, how fleeting. Swish. The baby goat's body turned into black ash and scattered. There was no sound. The scattered ash flying in the wind was the end of the goat. Go to a good place. Bah, bah, the surrounding goats cried. Red eyes appeared everywhere as their enemy, who killed their baby, appeared, numbering in the dozens and hundreds. And while looking at those goats, there are a lot who will go to a good place. Dumbfounded Chaos started to walk without hesitation. To kill all the goats he saw. But then, ma-ah. From far away, a different cry was heard. Creepy, creepy. A shuddering fear. The goats' heads turned in the direction of the crying sound. The foolish Chaos also stopped moving. It was because he thought that this was enough. Why didn't you do this earlier? Thud. The foolish Chaos, who turned around, walked towards the direction of the crying sound. The crying sound rang once and then disappeared. The goats that were blocking the foolish Chaos hid themselves in the bushes again, only their eyes sparkling. Like that, he passed through the black forest. Flash. A single purple eye met the foolish Chaos. You've come. A goat with 1,000 young goats in the black forest. Just like his alias, he was lying down in the deepest part of the black forest with the goats around him. The foolish Chaos's figure was reflected in the purple eyes. Swish. The foolish Chaos bowed his waist to greet him. The Shub-Niggurath before his eyes was one of the few beings with a higher rank than him. It's been a long time. Did you know that I would come out like this? I thought you would because you love your children so much. You speak well, even though you know the answer is no. I am a little too polite. Shub-Niggurath did not respond to the nonsense. Instead, he slowly got up and looked down at the foolish Chaos. And around Shub-Niggurath's neck. I've heard the story. There was a bite mark. It looks like the wound isn't healing well. It's taking quite a long time. Strangely enough. With Shub-Niggurath's regeneration power, the wound should have healed within a day. However, even after quite some time had passed since he was wounded, Shub-Niggurath's wound still hadn't healed. You knew, didn't you? Shub-Niggurath's eyes flashed. The goat's face, which lifted its head with a fearsome aura, approached the foolish Chaos. Was this part of your plan as well? I needed to confirm it. You used me as a sacrifice. That's why I came here to apologize. The foolish Chaos put his two hands together and bowed his head. He did not hesitate to beg for forgiveness. He felt annoyed that he had made a mistake, but Shub-Niggurath did not want to fight with the foolish Chaos in this situation. Of course, if he is really alive, you will be the most tired. Thank you for your understanding. The foolish Chaos bowed his head even deeper. He had come here prepared to have an arm torn off. It was fortunate that it had ended like this. Get lost. If you stay any longer, I might throw your arms and legs to the cubs here. I understand. How many times was he going to greet her? The foolish Chaos left a final greeting to Shub-Niggurath and left the black forest. On the way out, the baby goats followed the foolish Chaos, but he ignored them. If he had fought them because they were annoying him, he would only have angered Shub-Niggurath, who had calmed down. After leaving the black forest, Shub-Niggurath was attacked. The foolish Chaos's head became complicated. It really was. A small child's face appeared in the foolish Chaos's head. A small child, the size of a palm, smiling with an innocent face. On the surface, it was nothing to worry about. However, the foolish Chaos saw someone he knew on top of the child. Someone who should never appear before him. So he wanted to check. His abilities were not enough. Even with his avatar, he could not reach him through Zeus or Kim Yu-won at that time. So the foolish Chaos decided to use Shub-Niggurath. Thanks to that, I lost a lot, but, shoo, he looked up and saw the purple sky. I've confirmed what I needed to confirm. Shub-Niggurath's nape had been bitten. There was no being in the tower who could have inflicted such a wound on Shub-Niggurath. That meant one thing, our foolish and blind father. A chaotic and foolish being. An outer god. Among them, the original owner of the name, Foolish Chaos. It seems we have bad blood. The foolish Chaos closed his eyes. Now he had to prepare to go before him again. Chapter 399. A few thousand years ago, the Goblin King met a small goblin. Ur-Duk-Geji, a goblin so skinny and frail that he was about to collapse. The Goblin King found him in the most remote part of the Goblin Kingdom. I've heard stories. You're the boss here. At the same time, the eyes of the young goblin called Duk-Geji blazed. His eyes were full of venom, just like his name. It was amazing how such venom could pour out of such a withered body. You're good at fighting, but your body isn't very good. The Goblin King was interested in Duk-Geji. It was the same feeling he had when he first found Wuma Wong. The Goblin King saw potential in Duk-Geji. And that feeling had never been wrong before. Take this. Thud. A small mask fell in front of Duk-Geji. Come to me later with that. I'll make it fit you then. Who are you? Dutgeji asked, picking up the mask. He should have felt intimidated by the huge Goblin King, but Dutgeji didn't feel it at all. The Goblin King liked that attitude and smiled. You're a disrespectful bastard who doesn't even know the face of the king. The king? You, this guy. The more I look at you, the more I like you. The Goblin King stroked his chin. As he looked at Dutgeji, he thought of a way to change his skinny body. Do you want to be stronger? Yes. Not yes. Yes. Follow me. Yes. Oh yeah, that's right. You want to be stronger. The young Dutgeji. The Goblin King opened his mouth, looking at the mask in his hand. Your name is Amadel from now on. A few years later. Dutgeji, who was fighting in the alley, suddenly disappeared. The other young goblins who were fighting with him searched for Dutgeji to get revenge, but he was never found. A few hundred years passed. A goblin wearing a familiar mask appeared before the Goblin King. Amadel greets you. Oh yeah, at that time, Amadel was only a ranker. He was literally a chin-up. He was able to become a ranker because of the few spells he learned from the Goblin King and his natural venom. But that's why the Goblin King thought highly of him. Now all that's left is to fix your body. That day, Amadel received a physical enhancement spell. Amadel, who had overcome his weakness, became the strongest goblin after the king. That was the moment when the first mask of the goblins was born. Bubble, bubble, Amadel looked at the boiling potion. At some point, Yu-Wan stopped moving. He thought he had lost consciousness, but that wasn't it. The fact that the spell was still going on was proof of that. It had been 3 days already. Is he in a state of no self? He seemed to be half out of his mind. Even in that state, he was persevering without giving up the spell. This was truly a formidable willpower. Does he really intend to do all of this? At first, he thought it was too greedy. He would be lucky if he could get even half of it. Among them, it would be great if he could gain strength from Surtur's heart. But what the heck, it had already been 3 days. Yu-Wan hadn't even moved a muscle. It's almost over. It seemed that the Demon King was also running out of energy. The tips of his fingers, which had sweat on his forehead, were trembling slightly. Unlike Amadel, who had taken a break in between, the Demon King had not taken a break so far. It doesn't seem like there's anything left. The same was true for Wuma Wong. The two had the same opinion. There's nothing left. Bogil. Amadel stared at the still boiling soup. It was still as black as ink. What on earth is over? Smell. Amadel's nerves were concentrated on the tip of his nose. At some point, the stench from the potion had disappeared. He thought it was simply because he had become accustomed to the smell, but that didn't seem to be the case. Amadel's gaze turned to the potion. And that moment, steam began to rise rapidly from the boiling potion. Until now, the potion had been boiling only as a phenomenon caused by the spell. It wasn't that the potion was boiling or evaporating because heat was applied. But now it was a little different. Hot air was transmitted through the steam. The potion was evaporating. Why? Amadel had no choice but to stop the spell in the face of the boiling heat. The same was true for the Demon King and Wuma Wong. Get away, Jebek, Wuma Wong said, taking a step back from the boiling potion. It's probably going to be very hot. Quote. At Wuma Wang's words, Amadel and the Demon King also began to step back. As the distance grew a little, the heat intensified. Chi. The boiling steam rose into the sky, creating thick clouds. The moonlight was blocked by it, but ironically, the surroundings became brighter. Weruruk. Red and purple flames rose up, mixing together. The flames evaporated the potion containing Yu-Wan in an instant. There was no bad smell. There was only a slight earthy smell as the steam met the ground. Jebek. Someone walked out of the thick steam. It was obvious who it was. Kim Yu-Wan. There was no one in there but Yu-Wan. Nevertheless, Amadel had a momentary doubt about the obvious answer. Really, is it Kim Yu-Wan? It was still just a blurry figure in the steam. Nevertheless, Amadel couldn't think of the figure in the steam as Yu-Wan. Countless beings seemed to be visible through him. Right now, in Amadel's eyes, Yu-Wan was nothing more than a small monster with the power of one and many. Soon, Yu-Wan slowly walked out of the steam. Hiss. Amadel found Yu-Wan's unfocused eyes. He's conscious. Of course. He must have suffered from excruciating pain inside for 3 whole days. It would have been stranger if he had been in his right mind. It's even more strange that he's moving like this now. Are you okay? Don't come near. Wuma Wong blocked Amadel, who had taken a step toward Yu-Wan. The atmosphere was ominous. He could have just walked out, but Yu-Wan had evaporated all the medicine by emitting heat. It meant that he couldn't control his strength. You might get hurt for nothing. Clang. As Uma Wang stopped a madel, the Goblin King began to move. It was out of curiosity. How much stronger had Yuan become after completing a ritual of this scale? And whether the one in front of him was the same Yuan they had known until a few days ago. It seems to be a success, but... The Goblin King stroked his chin. Well, I'm not sure yet. The distance between the two was about 10 steps. Even that was 10 steps at Yuan's pace, but to the Goblin King, it was only about 3 steps. Did he lose his mind? Buzz. A body floating up. Quote. A question arose on the Goblin King's face. What on earth had happened in this short amount of time? The Goblin King's body, which had been flipped upside down, crashed to the ground. Kwang, Ujiak, Cuckoo. The ground split as the Goblin King fell to the floor. A wide crater. The Goblin King, who had fallen in the center of it, soon found his arm caught by Yuan. Quack. Yuan's hand grabbed the Goblin King tightly. The Goblin King was confident that he wouldn't lose to anyone except Uma Wang in terms of strength. No matter how much his strength had waned from using the ritual for days, it had been a long time since someone had gotten a hold of him like this. What the hell is this power? It seemed that the ritual had been quite successful. Of course, that was that. Crunch. Veins popped out on the Goblin King's forehead. He had helped him for days without eating or sleeping, and this was how he was repaid. He couldn't help but be annoyed. You bastard. That moment, swish, the strength in his hand was suddenly released. Thud. Yuan lost consciousness and collapsed on the spot. The Goblin King, who had been lying face down on the floor in surprise at the sudden situation, made a bewildered expression. What the hell is this? A sudden attack, followed by fainting. The startled Goblin King looked around him. The ground was cracked and broken, and the tiled roof of his house had collapsed from the impact. The Goblin King muttered to himself about the sudden chaos. I'm going to have to pay a high price for this. It had been a while since my mind had started to grow hazy. It had probably started when I began fighting Surtur's heart. I had almost entered a trance-like state. Still, one fortunate thing was that the other traits that had appeared after Surtur's heart were not as painful, since it was better to be hit first. When did I faint? That was my first thought when I regained consciousness. For some reason, my eyelids felt several times heavier than usual. I felt strong enough to lift a barbell with ease, but my eyelids were too heavy. But what could I do? I had slept enough, so I had to get up. And so, Yuan slowly opened his eyes. Are you awake? As expected, the Horse King was waiting for Yuan. Instead of answering, Yuan rolled his eyes and looked around the room he was lying in, along with the ceiling. It was an old house. Where had the Goblin King's magnificent tiled house gone? I was sure that I had received the Goblin King's permission to stay in his residence. As if he had read the question in Yuan's eyes, the Horse King spoke. I had no choice. You destroyed the house. Me. I couldn't remember. Me destroying the Goblin King's house. When did that happen? My head started to hurt. It seemed that my body hadn't fully recovered. Your body is fine. The problem is your mind. You tried to hold on to your consciousness as it was forcibly being cut off, so your head must hurt a lot. Thud. A cup of steaming tea. Yuan took the teacup that the Horse King handed him. Drink it. Just smelling the aroma will help your head a little. Thank you. I didn't know its name, but the aroma of the tea definitely seemed to calm me down a bit. As I drank the tea and thought about it, I still couldn't remember anything. I had no choice. If I couldn't remember, I had to ask. What happened? Your power has grown a lot. Yes. It seems like you really don't remember anything. Judging from the Horse King's reaction, he didn't seem to be joking. Of course, he wasn't Son Goku, and he didn't seem like the type to joke about something like this. Yuan waited for him to tell him what had happened first. Judging from the fact that he had destroyed the house, it seemed that I had caused some trouble. He'll probably tell me soon. Thinking that, Yuan quietly sipped his tea again. How is it? Swish. The Horse King extended his hand toward Yuan. Do you want to arm wrestle with me? Chapter 400. Yuan looked at the hand that Uma Wang had stretched out. Arm wrestling. What a simple proposal. It wasn't a reasonable offer for someone who had just woken up from fainting. If it had been Sun Ogong who had made the offer, it would have been different, but at least the Uma Wang that Yuan had met wasn't this reckless. But for some reason, Uma Wang's expression looked serious. Uma Wang was known as the Great Strength King, an ancient high ranker. As his name suggested, Uma Wang was known to be unmatched in strength. The only one who could arm wrestle with Uma Wang was probably Hercules. Wouldn't it be fun? Your body is all better now. No, it seems like it's even better than before. For some reason, it seemed like Wang was interested in this operation. Yuan was also curious. He wondered how much his stats had changed because of this operation, and how much stronger he had become. Name: Kim Yuan. Level: 125. Strength: 148. Agility: 131. Health: 151. Perception: 140. Magic power: 177. Available points: 34,150,400. Skills: Supreme Magic Sword, Mana Ball, Golden Eyes of Fire, Divine Flame, Gigantification. Details. It had been a while since he had checked his status window. Yuan was more of the type to feel his body directly rather than check his stats with his eyes. There were stats that he didn't check often, but he couldn't help but be curious. He wondered how many stats he had gained. It's definitely increased a lot. The most noticeable one was his magic power. It was now 177. It seemed like his magic power had definitely increased by a few points compared to before the operation. But it wasn't a huge change. Yuan's magic power was already over 170 before this. The other stats had changed more significantly. My strength and health have increased a lot. This was what he had wanted the most. A strong body capable of withstanding his 177 magic power. Yuan checked his stats and looked at Wang, who was still waiting with his hand outstretched. Arm wrestling, huh? Back when Yuan was active as a ranker, Wang had already lost his life and disappeared from the rankings, becoming an ancient high ranker. It was only because Sun Ogong was next to him that he could hear about him, whose name had almost been forgotten. Originally, Wang, whose power level was not that different from Sun Ogong's, had now passed the test and gained divinity, so how much stronger had he become? Let's give it a try. Swish. Wu-Wan grabbed Wang's hand. There was no need for a starting signal. Wu-Wan began to pull his arms toward him in the air. Will this do? Bang. Wu-Wan's brows furrowed at the strength he felt in his grip. Definitely. No matter how many treatments he received, it was still difficult to defeat Wang with just his strength. Then, the power of a giant is in your arms. Bang. For the first time, Wang's arm moved. Wang's expression changed. Only then did the corners of his mouth go up slightly, and he had a satisfied expression. Now it's a little more useful. Creak, creak. The bed that Wu-Wan was lying on began to split. The arms of the two men did not budge in the air. Wang looked at Wu-Wan, who was facing his strength with his giant transformation. You've gained some traits. It wasn't just the strength he felt in his grip and arms. Wang remembered the sight of Wu-Wan thrusting the Goblin King into the ground in one breath. This can't be all. Wu-Wan still hadn't shown that much strength. He wanted to check, where did that power come from? Then, likewise, he had no choice but to increase his strength. What are these things trying to break again? A voice rang out from the ceiling. The strength in Wu-Wan's and Wang's arms dissipated. Before they knew it, the bed was split, and it wouldn't be strange for it to collapse at any moment, and the building was beginning to shake little by little. Now both of you be quiet. If this place collapses, you know you'll be kicked out. It was the Goblin King. Of course, he must have been quite annoyed since the castle and the other place he was staying at had collapsed. Naturally, Wang and Wu-Wan had no choice but to let go of their hands awkwardly. I did something unnecessary. Wang, who had hastily reached out to Wu-Wan, chuckled. His words did not seem like an appropriate suggestion to make to Yuan, who had just regained consciousness after fainting. I'm fine. I'm not hurt anywhere. I'm glad to hear that. Sitting on a chair beside the bed, the Demon King of the West had an imposing presence. He briefly admired the scenery outside the window. The goblins were still drinking heavily, laughing and talking loudly with drunken bravado. These days, it's been quite noisy outside. Ever since Shub-Niggurath had appeared. The tower had been going through a period of great chaos. Even the Demon King of the West, who had just come down, could sense it. This must have happened in the future, you know, too. This is just the beginning. Yu-Wan recalled the eyes of Shub-Niggurath, which had been glaring at him, in his mind. It's a bit noisy, though. It was definitely excessive for a beginning. Of all people, it had to be Shub-Niggurath. What are you going to do, brother? I'm going to go up. Up, yes, brother. The word, brother, came out so naturally. Yu-Wan paused awkwardly for a moment before asking. What are you going to do? I'm going to look for Sun Ogong. Despite how long awaited those words were, the Demon King of the West didn't show much of a reaction. He simply continued speaking with his usual relaxed expression. Other than fighting, is there anything else that punk is good at? Yuan laughed for the first time in a while at the words that were a mix of jest and seriousness. Well, if he could reach China, meet a guy named Buddha, and fight him, then Yuan wondered how Sun Ogong would find him. But if the Demon King of the West was with him, he felt like he could rest a little easier. Thud. After finishing his conversation, the Demon King of the West pushed back his chair and stood up. You do your thing, I'll do mine, and later, when there's something we have to do together, if you need my help, I'll help you. His business here was finished. Both the Demon King of the West and Yuan. There was no need to waste any more time here. The Demon King of the West left the room with a short greeting. Get some rest now. Creak. The door closed slowly. The Demon King of the West walked down the stairs. It was a world where day never came, but for some reason, his mood was as refreshing as the morning. Russell. His lips turned up without him realizing it. Brother, you, Hyungnim, Ira. The two headed towards a forest far from the city. Another day passed. After forcing himself to sleep, his heavy head felt refreshed as if it had been washed. Thud. He had not used his body for a few days, and he already felt stiff all over. No, to be exact, he had not adapted to his changed body. This is a mess. He thought that if he had known this would happen, he would have asked the Demon King to help him even if he had to push himself a little. Even if only 1 or 2 stats changed, it was necessary to adapt. However, he had gained dozens of stats and traits, so it was natural that he would feel unnatural as if his body was not his own. It seemed that he would have to postpone the test for a few more days. It's about to start. The Demon King began to move right away. The Day of Unity hosted by Odin and Asgard was not far away. From now on, the world would change rapidly. A wave had begun to rise in the tower that had been stagnant for a long time. And the one who had started to cause that wave was none other than himself. I should at least say hello before I go. Yuan changed back into the clothes he was comfortable wearing and went straight to the Demon King. It was not difficult to find the Demon King's new residence. He could find out by asking any drunk goblin on the street. Thud. It was a much smaller house than the Demon King's second residence. A different tile-roofed house located in the middle of the city. Goblins were bustling around it. And in front of the gate. You're here. Lee Madel was waiting for Yuan. Are you here to say hello? To say hello, and other things. If greeting is incidental, what is the other business? I haven't paid you yet. If I take this for free, what will happen to me later? I know. I'll see your blood. Swish. Lee Madel walked past Yuan. Yuan, who thought he would guide him to the Demon King, turned his head to see where he was going. The king is not here. Lee Madel gestured for him to follow and started walking. Yuan's gaze went to Lee Madel's feet. Whether he was using Shunpo or not, each of Lee Madel's steps covered more distance than 10 steps of others. His strides were rapidly moving away. Swish. Yuan's pace quickened as well. The two headed towards a forest far from the city. What is this? Whoosh. The wind blew through the bushes. A forest made of bamboo. This is a great place to fight. Clack. Lee Madel stopped walking. Yuan, who was following right behind him, also stopped, and not too far away, the Goblin King was sitting on a chair carved out of a small rock. You've worked hard. Not at all. Lee Madel bowed his head once towards the Goblin King and stepped aside. The Goblin King stood up, and there was a fighting spirit coming from his body that he hadn't felt before. Shall we have a nice fight in the bamboo forest? Can I do that much? I should at least crush the goblin who helped me to the ground with all his might. Did I really do that? When Wu Ma Wang said that he had destroyed the Goblin King's house, it seemed like this was what he was talking about. But Yuan was surprised that he had crushed the Goblin King, who was a master of strength, to the ground. I don't remember. Yeah, Wu said that you're not the same as you were back then. The Goblin King, who had seen Yuan's power up close, had recalled that moment hundreds, thousands of times since that day. What was that? The power that lifted his body in an instant and slammed him into the ground. The Goblin King wanted to know its true nature. It seems that I can't bring out that kind of power unless I do it properly. Is that why you called me here? It was an absurd reason. He was asking him to fight over something he didn't even remember doing and didn't know how to do. I can't break my house for the 3rd time after breaking it twice already. Anyway, I wanted to check it out for myself. I don't really know what that is. Cuckoo. Yuan's eyes widened at the force that was pressing down on his shoulders. Just a few days ago, the Goblin King was building up his momentum just like when he fought Wu Ma Wang. And then, slowly, think of it as training and don't hold back. But I'll tell you this in advance. Swish, the mask covering the Goblin King's face began to peel off. Because in this fight, I'm prepared to kill you.